When my husband Sean returned home, his presence always seemed to bring a cloud of unhappiness. He immediately began venting his frustrations on me, despite having already eaten dinner and claiming he didn't need it. His suit and bag lay scattered on the floor, a clear sign of his agitation. Reluctantly, I started cleaning up after him. As I picked up his suit jacket, a piece of paper fell out. It was a completed divorce form, signed by Sean. Shocked and trembling, I realized that Sean was considering divorcing me. My name is Michelle, a 52-year-old housewife married to Sean, who is 3 years older than me. We've been together for over 2 decades. My naturally shy nature has often made me an easy target for others to take advantage of. This tendency to avoid conflict and keep my opinions to myself stemmed from past experiences, like losing belongings without standing up for myself. However, things changed when I started working. The company culture emphasized teamwork and communication, which forced me to interact with my colleagues. Surprisingly, they were supportive, and I learned to express myself. Sean, who was initially my supervisor and later became my husband, played a significant role in this transformation. He encouraged me to voice my opinions and supported my growth. Sean was not only skilled at his job, but also had a pleasant personality that was admired by both clients and coworkers, making him popular among female employees. However, I only viewed him as my boss and never harbored any romantic feelings towards him, despite his popularity. Then, our relationship took an unexpected turn during the company's year-end party. I accidentally got drunk due to nerves, and while my colleagues were concerned, Sean offered to take me home. I felt guilty for inconveniencing him, assuming he preferred to stay and socialize with the rest of the staff as the boss. But when I apologized, Sean said something unexpected. He expressed that he didn't mind being inconvenienced by someone important to him, and he reassured me not to worry about it. I was taken aback by Sean's words, and as I tried to process them, he suddenly confessed his romantic feelings for me, saying he liked me and wanted to date me. It was a shock, but I found myself feeling happy about his confession. I asked for some time to think it over, but gradually, I began to see Sean in a different light. Our feelings for each other grew, and we started dating. 6 months into our relationship, Sean proposed, and we got married. At the time, it was common for married female employees to resign, so I left my job to become a full-time housewife. After we married, we soon welcomed our daughter into the world, and I dedicated myself to managing household tasks and raising her while supporting my husband Sean. I put a lot of effort into taking care of our home and nurturing our daughter, and I took pride in my parenting abilities. However, after more than 20 years of marriage, I began to notice a significant change in Sean's attitude towards me. It seemed like he no longer saw me as his wife, especially evident in his sighs and constant irritability whenever he came home from work. His gaze towards me became harsher, and his criticisms grew increasingly hurtful. He would often comment on my appearance, telling me to stop going without makeup and to dress better, even comparing me unfavorably to a maid. Despite trying to save money, as our daughter had recently moved out and found a job, Sean reduced the amount of money he gave me for household expenses. Consequently, I couldn't even afford to visit a hairdresser and had to resort to cutting my own hair. The decrease in our living expenses was partly due to Sean's increased business trips, which seemed to involve a lot of drinking and additional expenses. Despite my concerns about this sudden increase in trips, Sean justified it by saying he was mentoring his subordinates and had a responsibility to accompany them. In the early days of our relationship, Sean's business trips were rare and mostly for romantic getaways, with generous allowances provided by his company. However, now these trips occurred every 2 weeks, and the allowances were considerably less. When I questioned him about this change, Sean explained that he was accompanying his subordinates on their trips as their mentor. At this point, Sean had been promoted to sales director, so it seemed reasonable that he would be taking care of his subordinates. However, something he said while drunk one night stuck in my mind. He mentioned how the company had many young and attractive girls, unlike me, and that it was a real feast for the eyes. I felt mocked and degraded by his comparison, especially considering I was over 50 years old. It was unfair to compare me to the younger women at his workplace. I couldn't shake off the suspicion that Sean's frequent business trips might involve accompanying young female employees. If that were the case, it would mean that my living expenses were being sacrificed for his escapades with these girls. I couldn't forgive such behavior, even if I wasn't sure if he was having an affair. It felt unjust to have endured so much only to be treated this way. Sean's overnight business trips continued to increase, happening almost every week. All I could do was silently see him off, as he always claimed it was for work, leaving me no room to argue. When he returned, he often mentioned the same woman's name, comparing her beauty unfavorably to mine. He made hurtful remarks about my appearance, especially when he was drunk, showing his disdain for me. Despite Sean's flaws, he seemed oblivious to them. He had gained weight over the years, and his personal hygiene had declined, especially in the summer when he sweated profusely. His hair had also started thinning, yet he had the audacity to criticize me while ignoring his own shortcomings. When I suggested increasing my living expenses so I could pay more attention to my appearance, Sean dismissed it, saying it would be a waste of money. However, when he wasn't satisfied with the meals I prepared, he lashed out, blaming me for not being able to do even the simplest household chores properly. It felt like a double standard, and I couldn't help but feel frustrated and resentful. I was really upset after Sean took control of my bank card. He claimed I was wasting the money I've earned, so he decided he would manage my salary. It left me speechless. Despite my attempts to reason with him, he wouldn't budge. Sean's contribution to our household income was minimal, which is why I had started working part-time. Then, out of the blue, he announced he'd be going on a solo business trip for about 6 months. I thought, fine, at least he won't be at home. But then he dropped another bombshell. We needed to cut our living expenses even more while he was away. I couldn't believe it. We were already struggling to make ends meet. There was barely anything left over each month, and sometimes I had to dip into my savings. When I protested and asked for my bank card back, Sean exploded into anger, calling me greedy and refusing to return it. I felt lost and powerless. A few days later, Sean left for his assignment, and I reached my breaking point. I couldn't continue like this. So I sought advice from my workplace, and they suggested opening a new account and having my salary deposited there. With online banking, I could manage everything easily. I followed their advice immediately, and soon enough, my salary was being deposited into my new account. Thanks to this, I could finally take control of my finances and lead a proper life again. Life continued for about 2 or 3 months after I took control of my finances. Then, I received a call from Sean, questioning why there hadn't been any salary deposited. Suspicious, I told him I had quit my part-time job and got fired. He responded with disdain and hung up. It felt like he was planning to use my salary without my permission, so I felt relieved that I had changed my account. Feeling uneasy about Sean's actions, I decided to hire a detective agency to investigate. About a month later, they uncovered a shocking truth. With this revelation, I made up my mind to separate from Sean and began preparing for a divorce. Time passed quickly, and the day Sean was supposed to return from his assignment arrived. When he walked in the door that evening, he seemed unusually lively at first. However, his mood soared as soon as he saw me, and he began taking out his frustrations on me. Despite my inner fury, I maintained a calm facade and welcomed him back. I knew it wasn't the right time for revenge yet. Sean grumpily headed to the bath, leaving his belongings scattered on the floor. As I picked up after him, a piece of paper fell out of his suit jacket. A completed divorce form with Sean's signature. My hands trembled as I realized he had been considering divorcing me. Overjoyed at the opportunity, I decided to submit the form right away. Sean didn't notice as he returned to bed exhausted, snoring loudly. Meanwhile, I wasted no time. I packed my belongings and left the house immediately, canceling my cell phone plan and switching to a new one to avoid Sean's attempts to contact me. I headed straight to a lawyer's office. Sean bombarded me with emails, likely realizing I was missing, but I ignored them. I stayed in a hotel that night and visited a real estate agency the next day to find a new place to live. I had already chosen some promising apartments in advance, so I quickly settled on one and began making preparations. Later, I reached out to a colleague of Sean's from his workplace, who had been there for over 20 years. She responded promptly, and I shared the shocking news of Sean's affair with a subordinate named Nicole, along with his deceit about taking sick leave to care for me. She reported it to the company, leading to a major investigation. As a result, Sean and Nicole faced consequences for their actions, and Sean was ultimately fired. Despite Sean's attempts to contact me, including blaming me for his troubles and begging for a chance to talk, I ignored them all. Through a lawyer, I claimed compensation and got back my bank card, which he had used without permission. Sean's life took a sharp downturn from being a well-off man with a respectable position to an unemployed middle-aged man overnight. His affair partner left him, and he even blamed me for that, but I paid no heed to his words. Recently, I became a full-time employee at the company where I had previously worked part-time. I'm focusing on my career, staying connected with my daughter, and enjoying meals out together. From now on, I plan to savor my single life to the fullest, both at work and in my personal life. I'm a 54-year-old man who went through a divorce with my wife when I was 46 and she was 48. It happened 8 years ago. My daughter, who is now 28, stopped talking to me completely and sided with her mother without asking how I felt about everything. It took me a long time to come to terms with how things turned out and find peace in my life. My ex-wife tried hard to ruin my reputation, and that, along with losing my daughter, has been incredibly difficult. I deeply loved my daughter, and not being part of her life has been incredibly painful, especially because she was an adult when this happened, and I couldn't force my way into her life. She was firm in her decision to stick with her mom. I don't have much family apart from my mom, who has Alzheimer's, so this has been one of the toughest periods of my life. I tried reaching out to my daughter several times, but she was determined to stay on her mom's side and didn't want to hear my perspective. At one point, my ex-wife even threatened legal action if I kept trying to contact our daughter. Since then, I've spent the past 8 years taking care of my mom and focusing on work. I've had a few short-term relationships, but I struggled to fully trust anyone after what happened with my marriage. Recently, my daughter got in touch after all this time. I was thrilled, hoping she had come to understand that the divorce wasn't just my fault. This was especially comforting since my mother had just passed away, and I was dealing with that grief alone. My daughter reached out a few months after my mom's passing. I received a call from an unfamiliar number, and it turned out to be her. She mentioned she saw on Facebook that her grandma had passed and wanted to see how I was doing. I was surprised she had kept tabs on me online. We talked for a bit, and she suggested meeting in person to catch up. I was overjoyed and immediately agreed. We arranged to meet at my house over the weekend, and I was really looking forward to reconnecting with her. After all these years, I'm sharing my excitement with anyone reading this because my daughter recently came over for dinner. I wanted to cook for her and was nervous and excited when I opened the door. It had been almost a decade since I last saw her, and she was just a child back then, so I didn't recognize her at first. We started talking, and though it was a bit awkward initially, we both opened up as the evening went on. She told me about her life and work, and I shared what I'd been up to. After dinner, we finally addressed the lingering issue. I asked her why she never listened to my side of the story during the divorce, and simply sided with her mom by default. I admitted that her mom was more available as a parent since she stayed home, whereas I worked long hours in construction. Despite that, I'd always made an effort to spend time with her. My daughter expressed regret about how things turned out, saying she was too young to see things clearly and was influenced by her mom's portrayal of me. According to her, my ex-wife painted me as the bad guy who only cared about himself. Since my daughter never heard my perspective, she believed what her mom said without question. We discussed this further, and it seemed like we were making progress. However, as we talked for hours, she finally revealed why she had reached out after all this time. I asked her honestly what prompted her to reconnect, and she seemed uncomfortable. She confessed that she had been keeping tabs on me through Facebook. When she found out her grandmother had passed away, she expected lawyers to contact her about inheritance. But when that didn't happen, she decided to reach out directly. She then mentioned she had recently gotten engaged and needed financial help for wedding expenses. This revelation felt like a punch in the gut. Honestly, I thought my prayers had been answered after all these years, hoping to rebuild a family bond. However, it turned out my daughter's reconnecting was motivated by her desire to secure her inheritance. Ironically, legally, the inheritance is mine, and as she had been a better daughter to me, she would likely have inherited most, if not all of it. I've never been focused on money. I live in my own house, have simple hobbies, and buy my clothes from places like Target. Even if the inheritance were not in question, I wouldn't have minded helping with her wedding if she had approached me kindly instead of fixating on the money. All of this raced through my mind, but I kept my composure and asked her directly if that was her sole purpose in reaching out. She became defensive, claiming the inheritance was secondary and that her true goal was to reconnect with me. She said she regretted not reaching out while her grandmother was alive and had wanted to do so for years, but feared I wouldn't forgive her for abandoning me without explanation. She also admitted she was manipulated by her mom. However, her panicked demeanor made me doubt her sincerity, wondering if she was just trying to smooth things over to gain access to the money. I asked how she knew about the inheritance, and she explained that years before the divorce, my late mother had told her she would inherit everything left by my father, who had passed away long ago. At that time, my marriage was intact, so it made sense why my mother would say that to her. If not for the divorce and my daughter's abandonment, the money would indeed have been hers. The realization that she might only care about the money and had given me false hope crushed me. I was devastated but hid my feelings from her. To test her intentions, I decided to see how she would react if I told her there was no inheritance to claim. I asked her how much she was expecting from the inheritance, and her answer seemed carefully calculated. Then, I regretfully informed her that there was nothing for her to inherit. When I revealed to my daughter that her grandmother had left everything to me years ago, and that I planned to use that money to start a business, I couldn't assist her financially. Instead, I offered a few $1,000s from my own funds to help with her wedding expenses. The disappointment on her face confirmed my fears. She expressed appreciation but insisted that, as the only grandchild, she deserved a portion of the inheritance because it was her grandma's money. I explained that my decision was final and there was nothing more I could do for her financially. Her face turned red with anger, and she lashed out, calling me selfish and saying she was glad I was alone in life. Her words were hurtful, but I was not surprised by her true intentions. I stopped her from speaking further and confronted her, saying that she was just like her mother, only reaching out to ask for favors. I criticized her for trying to manipulate me while I was grieving for my mother, calling her behavior disgusting. She tried to say something, but I laughed in response, suggesting that if she hadn't blocked me all those years ago, she would have received my messages about her grandmother's situation and likely would have inherited the money. This revelation left her baffled, and she asked what I meant. I urged her to unblock my old number so I could resend those texts. After she complied, I forwarded the messages where I begged her to hear me out and informed her about her grandmother's Alzheimer's diagnosis, expressing the desire for them to meet before her grandmother forgot her only grandchild completely. This was all true, and it pained me deeply not to fulfill my mother's wish. Upon reading the messages, my daughter appeared ashamed and apologized to me. However, she argued that her grandma would have wanted her to have a share of the inheritance and that it wasn't fair for me to deny her that. Update 1. Hey everyone, Thanks for all the responses and advice on my previous post. It got more attention than I expected, and it's given me some perspective. Many of you asked about what happened during my divorce, so I'll share a bit about that. My wife and I were married for 23 years. Despite all that time together, she betrayed me by cheating with multiple men. I won't go into the details, but when I found out, I was devastated. I struggled to confront her, turned to heavy drinking, and engaged in reckless behavior. This took a toll on my life. During this chaotic time, my wife and I fought a lot, which I think made it easier for her to manipulate our daughter into siding with her. After nearly a year of living apart and going through a tough separation process, we eventually confronted each other and got divorced. My ex-wife, who was a local journalist and somewhat of a public figure, used her influence to damage my reputation, which was incredibly challenging to deal with. It took me a long time to overcome my drinking problem and regain stability in my life. Unfortunately, my daughter completely distanced herself from me during this period, which was really hard for me to handle. I admit that I wasn't a good parent during those times. I wasn't there for my daughter when she needed me, even after the divorce. I isolated myself and struggled to cope. However, when I finally got sober and began rebuilding my life, my first step was reaching out to my daughter to apologize. Sadly, she refused to listen and blocked me everywhere. I had hoped that giving my daughter time would help mend our relationship, but it's been 8 years now, and things have only worsened over time. As for the questions about my mom's inheritance, technically, the money belonged to my father. My grandparents, both doctors, invested in properties around the city during their careers, which generated substantial rental income. When my father passed away when I was 21, everything transferred to my mom's ownership. During my marriage and for a few years after the divorce, the properties remained under her name. After my mom passed away, I inherited everything as her sole heir. In the divorce, my wife didn't receive any of it except for alimony until she remarried a few years ago. My daughter never stood to inherit any of this because it was all under my mom's ownership. Although my daughter knew that her grandmother owned properties, I never used that money because my earnings from my construction business were enough for a comfortable life. I don't expect my daughter to reach out again after that night. It seems clear that she was only interested in the inheritance, which is no longer an option. I'm disappointed, but I've learned not to expect too much from people, regardless of who they are. Thank you all for your support and questions. I appreciate it. I think it's time for me to move forward and consider dating again, focusing on finding companionship rather than waiting for ghosts from my past to return. Update 2. This past week has been quite eventful. I had thought my last update would be the final one, but life had different plans. I had just returned from work and was considering going out with friends when the doorbell rang unexpectedly. To my surprise and dismay, it was my ex-wife standing there. She looked different, with a changed hairstyle and having lost some weight, so it took me a moment to recognize her. It's hard to forget someone you spent decades with. Feeling unsure of what to do, I awkwardly invited her in since I didn't want her standing at the door. The atmosphere was tense and uncomfortable, as you can imagine. We made small talk, and then she mentioned that there were things she needed to discuss with me. She explained that our daughter had reached out to her after learning about the inheritance. I had suspected this might be her motive for visiting after all these years. My ex-wife then tried to rationalize her actions during our divorce, acknowledging that she may have gone too far. I couldn't help but scoff at that, but she continued without acknowledging my reaction. She urged me not to hold resentment towards our daughter for choosing her mother's side during the divorce, emphasizing that our daughter was young and influenced by the situation. I interrupted her, expressing that I no longer held any resentment towards anyone. I shared my disappointment that they only reached out to me now because of the inheritance. I reiterated what I had told our daughter, that if they had genuinely wanted to reconnect earlier, they would have been part of the inheritance. My ex-wife attempted to defend herself, but I firmly stated that my decision was final. If they were only going to discuss this one issue in circles, then it was a waste of everyone's time. After our conversation, I politely mentioned that I had plans and suggested she leave if there was nothing else to discuss. She nodded understandingly, apologized for the interruption, and departed. Once she was gone, I sat there in disbelief. I never imagined I would see her again, let alone have a conversation in my own home. It was a strange experience that brought back memories I would rather have left in the past. To clear my mind, I went out with my friends and tried to put the encounter behind me. I needed to share this experience to process it, so thanks for reading along if you're still here. Update 3. I have another update for you all. This afternoon, I received a call from my daughter while I was at work. Initially, I hesitated to answer, thinking it might be about the inheritance again. However, curiosity got the better of me, so I picked up the call and immediately told her that if this was about the inheritance, I didn't see the point in having a conversation. To my surprise, she said there was something else she wanted to discuss. She expressed that she had been reflecting on the past and felt that she owed me an apology. She acknowledged that she should have handled things differently and asked if I would be willing to forgive her and give our relationship another chance by attending her wedding. I was taken aback by her words. I asked her if she was certain about this, and she reassured me, suggesting that I take some time to consider it and let her know if I would attend. I agreed, and we ended the call. Now I'm feeling really confused. Part of me is thrilled at the idea of being at her wedding, but I can't shake the suspicion that this might be her way of getting back into my good graces to secure the inheritance eventually. On the other hand, if she is sincere, I don't want to miss the chance to mend our relationship. If I decline and she never reaches out again, I can't blame her. I would appreciate any advice or thoughts from anyone willing to help me navigate this situation. Last update. Update. I've made the decision to attend my daughter's wedding. Many of you offered the perspective that attending the wedding couldn't do any harm, and I agree with that reasoning. I don't feel obligated to do anything in return for being invited. It's simply as a guest, not part of the wedding party. I understand that going from being estranged for 8 years to walking her down the aisle would be a significant leap, and I'm fine with just attending as a guest. I genuinely hope that this is the start of a new chapter in our relationship, and I'm optimistic about the possibility of building something meaningful from this point forward. Hey there, so I recently tied the knot with my husband after a 6-year relationship. Our wedding was an intimate affair at his aunt's farmhouse, though I had dreamed of a beach ceremony. We both loved the water and often visited the beach to unwind, so it held special meaning for us. I had even started looking into hotels for our guests, like any other bride, dreaming of a grand celebration. I work in advertising, and despite saving for years to host a luxurious seaside wedding, our plans changed drastically. My parents borrowed a substantial amount of money from me a few months ago. My brother also got married suddenly recently, and although it was a small affair, I was happy for him. Soon after, my mother asked to borrow $115,000 for my father's medical expenses, claiming his sudden illness was due to diabetes complications. I agreed without hesitation, concerned for his health. However, when I visited, my father seemed strangely not very sick, and my mother evaded my questions about his medical reports. She insisted on a specific, expensive, imported drug not covered by insurance. Despite my concerns, she assured me hospitalization wasn't necessary. After a few visits, I realized something was off with my parents, but I held off accusing them outright. Accusing them of lying about a medical emergency would have looked bad if it turned out to be true. I noticed my brother hadn't been visiting them either, and when I asked, my father claimed they didn't want to worry him because he was young and focused on work. Meanwhile, they seemed fine with me being worried sick. I eventually spoke with my brother on the phone after weeks of him not visiting our father. He mentioned he'd visit after his honeymoon, news to me as I didn't know he had already left. He explained they planned to surprise everyone with stories and photos after a month in Europe. He hadn't told me earlier because he was concerned when I mentioned our father's illness. My brother confirmed our parents had told him they were fine, and maybe they exaggerated the situation to me out of concern. I wanted to believe they hid the truth from my brother to spare his honeymoon, but what I saw at their house left no room for misunderstanding. As my brother revealed more details, warning bells rang loudly in my head. He admitted that our parents were funding his extravagant honeymoon, which would cost them at least $125,000. They were splurging on luxury hotels, fine dining, and shopping, all covered by our parents as a belated wedding gift. It dawned on me that my money was being used to finance this lavish trip, not for any medical emergency. There was never an emergency, no hospital visits, no medical documents. My parents concocted the story solely to divert funds towards my brother's honeymoon. Feeling utterly betrayed, I listened to my brother boast about our parents' generosity, knowing they had taken my wedding savings to finance his extravagant trip. It felt like a stab in the back to realize they prioritized his honeymoon over my wedding plans. When I confronted my parents after that revealing phone call, they explained that they concocted the medical emergency story because they knew I wouldn't willingly fund my brother's honeymoon. They justified their actions by claiming my brother was struggling at work and needed a morale boost. They couldn't afford to finance it themselves without jeopardizing their retirement savings, so they turned to me, believing I had more earning years ahead to recoup the money. They brushed off my anger, insisting it was just money and they would eventually repay me. According to them, my brother's rejuvenation and mental well-being were more important than my wedding plans. This was infuriating because it meant sacrificing my wedding budget for a cause I hadn't agreed to support. I demanded they repay me before my wedding because I needed those funds for my beach wedding expenses. Although my husband's family was helping cover some costs, I still had significant financial responsibilities. My parents had always made it clear they couldn't fund both my education and wedding, and I chose to pay for my wedding myself after college. Now their deception threatened to derail my carefully planned wedding, leaving me feeling betrayed and determined to reclaim what was rightfully mine. When my brother started college, I asked him if our parents had also forced him to choose between education and funding his future wedding. He laughed at the idea, dismissing it as ridiculous. Despite knowing my parents favored him, I never confronted them about it back then. I was young and still dependent on them, trying to avoid worsening our relationship. Years later, during the confrontation about the money they'd borrowed from me, I brought up their favoritism towards my brother. They denied it, but it was obvious to me. I insisted they repay me because I had saved diligently for my dream wedding, not to fund my brother's indulgences. They claimed they couldn't return the money all at once before my wedding and expected me to accept a repayment plan spanning years. According to them, family should come first, citing my willingness to spend on a fabricated medical emergency for my father as a reason to support my brother's mental well-being. The truth was, my brother's work struggles were due to his lack of dedication. His job in sales relied heavily on commissions, and his poor performance led to low earnings. He might have felt disappointed, but he was never at risk of depression from work-related issues. I can assure you that he was never at risk of depression. He simply lacked motivation due to being spoiled by my parents. They exaggerated his job dissatisfaction to justify funding his lavish trip and painting him as a victim in need of rescue. It was all nonsense, and I tried explaining to my parents how important my wedding was. They had committed to certain expenses with my husband's family, which I couldn't cover without the borrowed money. However, my parents insisted they couldn't return the funds before my wedding. They suggested scaling down or asking my husband's family for help. I found myself pleading with them to honor their commitment, but they just shook their heads, refusing to return the money before the wedding. I left their house in tears and confided everything in my husband, who was equally furious and upset. He wanted to involve a lawyer, but I knew there was no written proof of my mother's promise or the intended use of the money. It was all informal, with no binding contracts or documents to support my claim. Since we lacked any written evidence to support our case, filing a lawsuit against my mother seemed futile. We didn't want to waste more money on legal fees with little chance of success. Instead, we shifted our focus to revising our wedding plans. Thankfully, my husband's family stepped in after learning about my parents' actions. His aunt generously offered her farmhouse venue for free. Although we initially desired a beach wedding, his aunt's suggestion piqued our interest, and I decided to visit the venue. The moment I stepped inside, I knew it was perfect. Despite not being by the beach, we felt content with the beautiful farmhouse setting, especially given that we had this venue at no cost. I immersed myself in wedding planning, using it as motivation to distance myself from my parents. I had already decided they wouldn't be invited, but I wavered on inviting my brother since he was unaware of our parents' actions. After my brother returned from his honeymoon, he called me and berated me for asking our parents to return the money. He seemed to think it was no big deal, even though he was the one who spent the money. He promised to repay me eventually, but insisted I should just accept the situation and scale down my wedding plans. His reaction made my decision clear, and I stopped speaking to both him and my parents. Without my entire wedding fund, I couldn't afford a lavish event anymore. Surprisingly, scaling down worked out for the best. Our wedding was beautiful and meaningful, centered around us rather than impressing others with extravagance. We decided to use the money we saved for something more meaningful after the wedding. I'm grateful for how things turned out because our day was still dreamy and special, filled with genuine love from the people who mattered most. When I posted wedding photos recently, I made sure only invited family members knew about the event. I instructed them not to inform my parents or brother to avoid any drama. Now that everything went smoothly, I felt comfortable sharing our joy on social media. They somehow discovered my wedding photos and contacted me the next day, demanding to know why they weren't invited. I found it surprising that they expected an invitation, given our strained relationship. The last time I spoke with any of them ended in tears, and since then, there had been no communication. Despite this, they felt entitled to attend and were upset about being excluded. My parents initiated a call, adding my brother to join in the confrontation. They all yelled at me at once, but I remained unfazed and saw their behavior as entitled. I had already cut them out of my life and didn't want their drama interfering with my newly bliss. I explained that after they borrowed money from me, I had to downsize the wedding guest list to include only family and a few close friends. Since they were neither, they weren't invited. After the call, I blocked them in hopes of ending the drama. However, my husband informed me that my brother had reached out to him, relaying that my parents were deeply hurt and upset. My mother apparently cried so intensely that she nearly fainted. I started feeling guilty, despite knowing they had wronged me. The news of their distress over not being invited made me question my decision, even though I had every right to exclude them after they took money meant for my wedding. It's been a week since my last conversation with my parents and brother, and I decided to cut off all communication with them. My mother's tears won't change the reality. I was the one crying when I pleaded with them to return the money before my wedding, but they brushed it off. Now, I'll treat their actions with the same indifference. You reap what you sow. I explicitly told my brother never to contact me or my husband again, especially not my husband, who is innocent in all of this. I blocked him to ensure my family has no access to me. They've mistreated me for too long, and I won't tolerate it anymore. If I could, I'd file a lawsuit to reclaim my money, although it's a long shot without tangible evidence. My husband believes it's worth pursuing, and we're consulting with a reputable lawyer soon to decide our next steps. In the meantime, I'm brainstorming ways to get them to admit they borrowed the money under false pretenses, claiming it was for a medical emergency. Instead, they gave it to my brother for his honeymoon. Proving this in court will be challenging, but I won't let them off the hook easily. I deserve to get my money back, and I'm determined to make sure they return it to me promptly. Yesterday, I specifically asked my brother not to involve my husband in our family drama, but he ignored that request. When my husband returned from work, he informed me that my parents and brother had bombarded him with texts, demanding he convince me to unblock them. To make matters worse, they showed up at his workplace, tailing him and honking until he pulled over. My husband recognized my brother's car and knew they'd follow him home if he didn't stop. So he decided to face them and hear them out. My brother approached his car and insisted they talk in person. They settled in a nearby diner, where my family proceeded to lecture my husband. My brother expressed disbelief that I cut ties over money, considering it an overreaction. They argued that suggesting we weren't family because of a financial dispute was extreme. They hoped my husband could convince me to see reason and reconcile. My parents claimed they intended to return the money gradually, citing my brother's work struggles and their impending retirement. They painted me as unreasonable and inconsiderate. Instead of confronting them, my husband listened attentively and sympathetically. He suggested they send me a heartfelt message directly rather than through him. Up until now, my family had been accusing me, but my husband managed to convince them that acknowledging their mistakes might appease me. Miraculously, they fell for it. My husband manipulated them into sending a message admitting their actions, believing it would soften my stance and lead to an apology for me. In reality, we view this message as an admission of guilt, a crucial piece of evidence for our legal pursuit against them. I'm genuinely proud of my husband for handling the situation with such finesse. Better than I could have. He's like an evil genius, but he's my evil genius, and I love him for it. My husband's plan worked perfectly, and we're ecstatic right now. My parents and brother foolishly sent me an email confessing to every lie they told and detailing their wrongdoing. Now armed with this proof, our lawyer is moving forward with a petition to reclaim our $115,000. To me, that money represents 5 years of hard work and sacrifice. I refuse to let it go to waste because my brother is lazy and my parents enable him. We're committed to suing them, and we'll stop at nothing to get our money back. We've also started planning our honeymoon, a short trip back to the beach where our story began, a special place for us. In a few months, we might take a longer vacation, but for now, we're focused on doing what makes us happy. I don't want to be like my brother, who posted boastful photos from his honeymoon. Now, he's facing legal action for his actions. It's unfortunate for them, but they brought it upon themselves, and they deserve the consequences. We're ready to face whatever comes our way to ensure justice is served. Nearly 7 years ago, my family completely cut me off and forced me out of our home. At the time, I was only 22 and not financially secure enough to rent my own place. The suddenness of it all left me unprepared, both mentally and financially. The root of the problem was my sister, Hannah, who is 37 now. We've never been close due to our significant age difference. When she was 27, she married Pete, her boyfriend of 3 years. Their marriage lasted 3 years before ending in divorce, with Hannah accusing Pete of having an affair with one of my friends. After college, I started working and lived with my parents to save money before moving out. They were fine with this arrangement until my sister announced her divorce. She came home one day in tears, claiming Pete had been cheating on her for 6 months with my friend Emily. Emily, who was 28 and trying to gain weight, had consulted Pete as a dietitian, an introduction I facilitated. I was shocked by Hannah's accusations because I knew Emily to be a good person and doubted Pete's infidelity. However, my parents instantly sided with Hannah, believing her without question despite her lack of proof. They chose their daughter over their son-in-law, which I can't fault them for. What I couldn't understand was why they then kicked me out solely based on Hannah's word. She threw a tantrum, convinced my parents I had ruined her marriage by introducing Emily to Pete, and they agreed with her without hesitation. I was devastated and tried desperately to reason with my parents, but they wouldn't listen. They gave me an ultimatum: leave voluntarily or be forced out. In just one day, I lost my family and my home. I sat sobbing on the sidewalk with all my belongings for an hour before gathering myself and seeking refuge at a friend's house for the night. For days, I tried to reach my parents, but they ignored me. Thankfully, my friend allowed me to stay until I found my own place. Unfortunately, my parents firmly believed I was to blame for the divorce. They expressed disgust towards me, despite the fact that I had not been involved in Pete's infidelity. They blocked my calls and threatened to involve the police when I visited them. I finally realized they were serious and actually blamed me. It didn't surprise me, though, as my sister had always been the favored child. Growing up, I was used to being sidelined, but I never expected it to escalate like this. Looking back, I should have seen it coming, but who could predict such a betrayal? Cut off from my family and unable to contact Pete or Hannah, who had both moved away, I had no choice but to approach Emily, my last hope for answers. Despite not being close, I met with her and explained the situation. She vehemently denied the affair, stating she had only met Pete professionally a few times. Emily couldn't understand why Hannah would make such false accusations against her. Emily's assurance that she had a steady relationship and upcoming wedding plans provided convincing evidence that contradicted Hannah's claims. Despite this, I lacked concrete proof to challenge my family's beliefs or to reconcile with them. At the time, I desperately wanted to return home, missing my family despite their actions. Over time, however, I found ways to cope and move forward. I focused on my job and maintaining my own place, using these responsibilities to distract myself and pay the bills. Though I was hurting, I knew I had to keep moving forward, with or without my family's support. Years have passed, and my life has improved significantly. I moved to a larger apartment and got engaged to my girlfriend of 2 years. About a week ago, our engagement post unexpectedly changed everything for me. Shortly after posting, I received an email out of the blue that not only revealed the truth behind Hannah's divorce, but also provided concrete evidence. The catalyst for this revelation was a photo from our engagement that my fiancée Lisa shared on her Facebook, reaching a wider audience beyond her usual Instagram posts. Coincidentally, my ex-brother-in-law Pete saw the post on Facebook. Lisa had met Pete at a seminar, added him on Facebook, and he stumbled upon my profile. Pete, wanting to reach out discreetly, sent me an anonymous email to avoid any awkwardness since several years had passed since his divorce. He felt hesitant about reopening old wounds after initially blocking me. The email contained shocking details. Hannah had been cheating on Pete with a friend of mine, Frank, the cashier from a grocery store near Hannah's house. This was a complete surprise to me as I had never seen them together. Hannah falsely blamed Pete for the affair and accused me of orchestrating it all by introducing her to Frank and suggesting they collaborate musically. This revelation turned everything on its head. Frank, upon learning the truth, was furious and cut ties with my entire family, admitting now that his reaction was rash. The email provided closure and vindication after years of confusion and estrangement. Frank's initial reaction, fueled by anger, led him to act hastily without much thought. He admitted this to me in person, explaining that he had been so enraged that he didn't carefully consider his actions. The email he sent was intentionally impersonal to avoid being traced back to him, but I eventually deduced his involvement. The email contained compelling proof, screenshots of emails between my sister and Frank, discussing their deceitful plans to deceive Pete and expressing their love for each other. Hannah's use of her middle name in the emails left no room for denial. I realized it must have been Pete who sent me this eye-opening email after examining Liza's Facebook friends list and finding him there. Upon connecting with Pete, we met recently and he disclosed that he learned the truth from Emily, who he had met a few years back. Emily, unaware of my perspective due to my request for confidentiality, ultimately enlightened Pete about the divorce. Pete expressed regret for not reaching out to me sooner, citing his discomfort with the situation. Despite Pete's occasional embarrassment, I forgave him as I needed his support to confront my sister. Hannah had manipulated our parents for financial support during her divorce and scapegoated me to divert attention from her infidelity. She was selfishly dishonest, knowing that revealing the truth to our parents would jeopardize her position. I was appalled that someone, especially a family member, could be so deceitful and self-serving. Hannah's lies had been swallowed by our parents, and she never bothered to correct the record. Now armed with undeniable proof, I was determined to expose her deceit and bring justice to the situation she had unjustly inflicted upon me. Years had passed without visiting my family, so I wasn't sure if they still lived in the same house. Thankfully, an old neighbor confirmed their whereabouts, including the fact that Hannah was still residing with our parents. This wasn't surprising. Hannah had always preferred a comfortable, chore-free life at our parents' expense. 2 days ago, Pete and I decided to pay them an unannounced visit. My mom opened the door, clearly caught off guard, as we swiftly entered the living room where my dad and Hannah were present. Initially, the atmosphere felt like a reunion, but it quickly soured as my dad threatened to call the police unless we left immediately. I countered by insisting they listen to what we had to say first. My parents appeared bewildered, while Hannah looked visibly uncomfortable and excused herself to her room. Pete proceeded to present divorce documents and screenshots of Hannah and Frank's incriminating emails, while I narrated the true story behind Hannah's deception. We revealed how Hannah had deceitfully framed Pete for infidelity, leading to their divorce. Pete further disclosed that Hannah had to surrender our family heirloom, a diamond ring, as part of the settlement because she couldn't afford the required payment due to her job as a high school teacher. The revelations left my parents horrified, especially learning about the betrayal and manipulation orchestrated by their own daughter. Despite Hannah's attempts to deny and cover up the truth, she was cornered by the overwhelming evidence. Despite overwhelming evidence against her, my dad promptly kicked Hannah out. He packed her belongings and handed them to her, then ordered all of us to leave their house. I wasted no time and left with Pete, while my sister desperately pleaded with our parents to let her back in, mirroring the situation I faced years ago. It felt like karma at its finest, and I couldn't have been happier about the outcome. It's been a couple of days since then, and Hannah showed up at my place a few hours ago, demanding that I reconcile with our parents immediately. I was unsure how she found me, but I made it clear that I owed her nothing. She had ruined my life once, so I repaid the favor, and now we were even. Hannah broke down into tears and accused me of being a monster, but I remained unmoved by her theatrics. I closed the door on her and focused on my music, blocking out the drama. Eventually, she left, leaving a bitter message on my door calling me a revengeful monster. I don't see anything wrong with my actions and feel no remorse. Hannah seems convinced that I'm the villain, but I simply confronted her lies and deceit, unlike her manipulative behavior towards me in the past. What do you all think? Was I justified in exposing my sister's lies and getting her kicked out 7 years after she falsely accused me of causing her divorce? Despite a week passing since Hannah was kicked out, she continues to bother me incessantly. Today alone, she called me 14 times until I finally had to threaten involving the police for her to stop. I'm not sure how she got my phone number and address, but I'm not particularly concerned about that at the moment. Hannah is attempting to evoke sympathy from me, claiming that a school teacher's salary isn't enough to sustain her. However, I believe she's simply upset about having to find her own place and cover her expenses now that our parents have cut her off. Frankly, I don't feel sorry for her. In case you're wondering, yes, I've blocked her number multiple times, but she seems to be getting around it by having her friends add me to conference calls. As for my parents, they're just as bad, if not worse, than Hannah. They found me on Facebook, saw my engagement post, and suddenly want to be part of my life again. They even express a desire to attend my wedding, despite not having apologized for their actions. I find it baffling that they have the audacity to make such requests, but I'm choosing not to engage with them. Lisa and I have been amused by their texts, as it's difficult to believe they're serious. The situation is rather sad for them, but I'm focused on moving forward with my life without their interference. Hannah once again showed up at my house, despite my warning of reporting her for harassment. I was getting ready to leave for work when she dramatically threw herself across the hood of my car, refusing to move until I spoke with her. Frustrated, I ended up calling the police this time. They took her away while she screamed and cried, attempting to portray me as the villain. However, her theatrics didn't sway anyone, and after pressing charges, I left for work to avoid letting the incident ruin my day. As expected, my parents bailed her out, reinforcing their biased favoritism towards her. They then sent me a lengthy text humorously justifying their actions as an honest mistake made nearly a decade ago. It was absurd, considering the deliberate cruelty I endured from both my sister and parents. They were fully aware of their actions and the impact on my life. In response, I texted back, asserting that they lost any right to dictate my choices years ago, and they should stop deluding themselves. I haven't yet blocked them because I haven't had the chance to check my messages thoroughly, but I plan to do so soon to sever ties with my toxic family for good. I returned home from work and checked my social media, only to find another lengthy message from my parents. Lisa and I read it together, both amused by their delusional words. It's comical how they still believe we're a family and expect me to reconcile with them after all they've done. They proudly announced that they've taken Hannah back in and declared that both their children deserve a second chance. As if I had ever been in the wrong. While they welcomed my sister back, they assumed Lisa and I would join them for dinner to sort out our differences before the wedding. It's bold of them to assume I want them at my wedding at all. Lisa and I had a good laugh at their message before I firmly responded that I have no interest in anything they've invited us to. I made it clear that I've been fine without them for the past 7 years and don't need or want their forgiveness or presence in my life. I blocked them for good, no longer finding their attempts amusing. I'm content with Lisa as my family now. My parents and sister have always been self-centered, and I doubt they'll ever change. If they try to contact me again, they'll be hearing from my lawyer. I've moved on and won't allow them to disrupt my life any further. I'm dealing with a difficult situation in my life right now. My mom and sister have been taking advantage of me for years, and now it's gotten to a point where I feel like I need to distance myself from them. However, I'm torn because cutting them off would leave them struggling financially, which I find hard to accept. I'm 38 years old, married with 2 kids, and have been living in Ohio for the past 6 years. Originally, I'm from Houston, and my upbringing was tough due to my parents' divorce. My dad accused my mom of infidelity, which led to their separation when I was 10 years old, and my sister was 5. It's unclear whether the accusation was true or not, as my mom never remarried. My dad supported my education but didn't provide for my sister, and my mom didn't contest it. This fueled the belief that my sister might not be my dad's biological daughter. My dad wasn't present for most of my childhood, only showing up occasionally to pay for my school fees and bring me gifts. When I reached high school, I reached out to my dad, and since then, he's been a significant part of my life. Despite my mom's resistance, he even attended my wedding. Over the years, I grew closer to my dad than to my mom. He visited Ohio a couple of times after I settled there, but sadly, his time was cut short when he was diagnosed with a terminal illness and passed away last year. My mom didn't approve of my bond with my dad and became distant from me. My dad named me as his heir. He remarried after divorcing my mom, but he didn't have any children from his second marriage. He always considered me his only daughter. Naturally, my mom and sister weren't happy about this because my dad favored me, and I inherited his $400,000 trust fund. But it's not just about the money. Throughout my childhood, my dad supported my education, which allowed me to attend better schools and colleges compared to my sister. This support started coming in when I was around 10, and by the time I was 12, my mom had little control over it. The education fees were paid directly to the school and college from the child support money. My mom did use some of the money for my sister in household expenses, but she made sure to keep me content so I wouldn't complain to anyone. Growing up, I wouldn't say my mom and sister were evil, but they definitely favored each other over me. I was smart both academically and streetwise, and I didn't let them walk all over me. Maybe that's why my mom never mistreated me. Nowadays, my main issue is the $400,000 inheritance from my dad. Ever since my mom and sister found out about it, they keep coming to me for money for various reasons. This isn't the first time they've asked for financial help. As I started earning more, their needs seem to have grown too. They don't make much money themselves. My mom works as a cashier and my sister in sales, but together they don't earn half of what I do. Despite not being very emotionally close, I feel obligated to help them because they're family, and they've never been outright mean to me. A few months back, my mom called me, saying she wanted to renovate our old house. It's been falling apart since my dad left, crumbling walls, damaged ceilings, and faulty wiring. She explained that living there during storms was becoming unbearable. The condition of the house was getting worse, almost as if it might collapse any day. My mom hinted at needing money for renovations during a conversation, mentioning that she had visited the bank for a loan but found the interest rates too high. It was clear what she wanted, but neither of us directly addressed it. After that talk, I started avoiding her calls. Although she didn't usually call frequently, however, last month, she called me several times. When I finally answered, she admitted that it was becoming unsafe to live in the house during bad weather and straightforwardly asked me for $100,000, promising to pay it back in installments. I was taken aback and told her I couldn't lend that much. She then alluded to the inheritance money, which infuriated me, but I didn't want to discuss it further. Eventually, we settled on $50,000 as the maximum amount I could lend her, and she agreed. After agreeing to lend my mom $50,000, I began to regret my impulsive decision. I could have just ignored her request, but now that I'd committed, I didn't feel good about lending such a large sum. My husband suggested lending the money in installments and keeping an eye on the progress of the renovations before giving more. I informed my mom that I would be sending the money in installments. I decided to transfer the first $10,000 to my inactive Houston account and gave her access to it. When she questioned why I didn't transfer the money directly to her account, I made up some excuse, blaming it on my husband's suggestion. I'm not very hopeful that she'll return the money, but I'll wait and see how it goes. I can't quite pinpoint exactly how my mom and sister attempted to manipulate me for easy money. It's been 2 months since I started lending money to my mom for the house renovations. So far, I've given her $20,000, and that's where it stops. I always knew they were only nice to me because of my money, but I never expected them to lie to me so blatantly just to get more out of me. If they had been honest about their intentions, it wouldn't have hurt as much. Recently, I found out from one of my school friends that my sister is getting married. Interestingly, my friend's husband is a wedding planner, and my sister has been working with their agency to plan her extravagant wedding. I don't think my sister realized that I'm friends with them. This wedding is no small affair. They're calling it a grand event. What stings the most is that I wasn't even informed about it, let alone invited. I had imagined it to be a close, intimate affair, but my friend revealed that the guest list had around 100 people. It's disheartening not to be included in even the smallest part of my sister's big day. But what bothers me more is where she got the money to fund such an extravagant wedding. The venue is one of the best in town, with unlimited food, drinks, and top-notch decorations. It leaves me wondering how she managed to afford it all. I decided to check the bank account where I had been sending money for my mom's supposed renovation work. To my surprise, the account was empty. When I called my mom to ask about the progress of the renovations, she claimed that the work hadn't started yet, despite her hiring a renovation company. I couldn't stomach her lies any longer. Although I wasn't certain if they were actually using my money for her wedding, the thought disgusted me. It seemed hypocritical for them to splurge on her wedding while still taking money from me for house renovations. For a moment, I considered flying down to Houston to see for myself what was really going on, but I quickly realized it wouldn't be worth it. Instead, I reached out to my aunt, my father's sister, who lived nearby my mom's house. I asked her if she knew about my sister's wedding, and she confirmed that she did, but she hadn't been invited either. Considering my mom's strained relationship with my father's side of the family, this wasn't surprising. My aunt mentioned that my sister's wedding had become the talk of the neighborhood. It struck me how just a few years ago, their house was falling apart, and they struggled to make ends meet. Now, they suddenly had a brand new house and were throwing a lavish wedding. Feeling dizzy and disoriented, I processed the conflicting information. My mom claimed the house renovations hadn't begun. Yet my aunt said the house was gleaming with new paint. Then it hit me. About 6 months ago, my mom asked me for $20,000 for a knee transplant. Curious, I called her to inquire about the details, fabricating a story about a friend needing orthopedic information. Caught off guard, my mom stumbled over her words. Unable to provide any hospital or clinic details, she quickly made excuses and hung up, later turning off her phone and ignoring my attempts to contact her. Realization dawned on me. The money I gave her for the transplant was likely diverted to the house renovations, while the funds I continued to provide for the renovations were likely funding my sister's extravagant wedding. The shock deepened when I learned that my sister's engagement had been held at my own house, lavishly decorated with lilies and overflowing with wine. I felt utterly blindsided, living in ignorance while my family pretended to be financially struggling, all the while draining money from me. Fed up with their lies and manipulation, I decided to ghost them. I stopped sending money to the account and ignored all attempts at communication from my mom and sister. Even when my sister, who hadn't reached out to me in years, tried to contact me, I remained silent. I refused to be their scapegoat any longer. It doesn't matter that I earn more than them, or that my father left me an inheritance while giving them nothing. Their attempts to leech off me with their deceitful tactics are unacceptable. I've made a vow to myself to sabotage my mom's princess's big day. I was proven right about my mom's behavior when she resorted to calling my husband after I ignored all their attempts at communication. Despite warning my husband not to engage with them, he caved when my mom called him. She started crying, claiming that I had abandoned them and that they desperately needed the money for the ongoing renovation work. My husband, to my dismay, blurted out the truth, exposing their deceitful actions. He told her that we knew about their plan to use my money for my sister's wedding under the guise of house renovations, as well as the falsehood regarding the knee transplant. I was infuriated by my husband's honesty, as I had hoped to make them suffer for their deception. To add insult to injury, my mom bombarded my phone with apologies and excuses. She claimed it was all a misunderstanding and that she had borrowed money from someone else for the house repairs, intending to repay them with my funds. It was just another attempt to deceive me. After numerous calls and messages from my mom, I finally agreed to speak with her on the condition that she told me the truth. Reluctantly, she admitted everything. She confessed that my sister wanted a lavish wedding, but they lacked the funds. So they devised a plan to extract money from me under the guise of house renovations. It was my sister's idea to use the renovation excuse to manipulate me into giving them money. They were aware that I hadn't visited Houston in years and had lost touch with people there, making it unlikely for me to know about the house renovations. When I confronted my mom about why she hadn't been honest and simply asked me for money directly for the wedding, she claimed my sister didn't want to accept a direct favor from me. It was a shocking revelation. I pointed out that I knew she used the money meant for the knee transplant to repair the house, and she fell silent. I told her I knew the whole truth, so there was no point in hiding it. She admitted that they hurriedly fabricated the knee transplant story because the house was in disrepair, and my sister's in-laws were planning to visit. They couldn't come up with a better emergency reason to ask for money, so they panicked and made up the story about the urgent knee transplant. While I remained composed during the call, inside, I was devastated. How could my own mother deceive me for her own benefit? I understood they had financial difficulties, but that didn't justify their manipulation and extortion of money from me by playing on my emotions. After hearing the truth, I hung up and cried for hours. It was the hardest I'd cried since my father passed away. That day, I missed him terribly. He was the only one who truly loved and cared for me. After 2 days, I received a voicemail from my mom, asking me to send the remaining amount for the wedding preparations now that I knew the truth. It disgusted me to my core. If she weren't my mother, I would have unleashed a torrent of abuse on her. How could she be so self-centered? There was no hint of remorse in her voice. All she cared about was money. They didn't even bother to invite me to the wedding, not even out of formality. When the truth finally came out, I felt overwhelmed with frustration. I couldn't bear their selfishness any longer. I promptly blocked both of them. I also warned my husband not to entertain their calls, and if he dared disobey me, he would find himself sleeping outside on the porch in the cold night. I meant every word of it. I've stayed in touch with my aunt, who informed me that the wedding is scheduled for next month. I didn't disclose the details about the money, but I know for sure that my mom and sister are struggling to put together the extravagant wedding they had dreamed of. And frankly, I think it serves them right. Despite standing firm on my decision, I continue to receive calls and voicemails from my mom and sister, persistently asking for the money. However, I remained resolute and didn't waver. On the day of the wedding, my mom's last voicemail expressed her disappointment in me, disowning me and forbidding me from calling her mom or visiting her ever again. Hearing those words shattered me, and I broke down in tears in front of my husband. Some might label me as evil or stubborn for ruining my sister's wedding, and my mom accused me of being arrogant and self-centered. But she never acknowledged her lies or deception. All this time, I helped them because I felt obligated to do so, considering them my family. But to them, I was merely a means to make money. On the wedding day, I received a call from my friend, whose husband was my sister's wedding planner. She informed me that the wedding might be canceled because they hadn't paid the remaining expenses. When I asked how much they had paid so far, she said $20,000. I remarked that $20,000 was sufficient for a decent wedding, but my sister had ordered top-notch decorations and food, and even the venue itself cost around $20,000. When asked if I was attending the wedding, I declined, citing other commitments. My friend understood that I wasn't particularly close to my mom and sister. To be honest, I couldn't shake off the feeling of guilt for ruining my sister's wedding. At one point, I even considered transferring the remaining amount to my friend and asking her to proceed with the wedding plans. But then I remembered my mother's hurtful voicemail disowning me. What was the point of going above and beyond for them when I ended up being disowned in the end? My actions might not have been ideal, but they were a reaction to their deceitful behavior. I decided to switch off my phone and spend the day out with my kids to distract myself from the turmoil. The next day, my friend called again, expressing her anger at my sister for bringing down her husband's reputation in the market. On the wedding day, my mom and sister had begged her husband, the wedding planner, to arrange something basic for the wedding and promised to pay an additional $10,000 later. Despite the advance payment of $20,000 covering most of the venue costs, the arrangements were criticized harshly by the guests and the groom's family. To make matters worse, my sister blamed everything on the wedding planner, shifting all the blame onto him. My friend's husband, being a good man, chose to remain silent and took the blame upon himself, allowing the wedding to proceed. Yet my family hadn't even paid the promised additional $10,000 yet. I felt deeply embarrassed hearing about my family's ordeal. While my friend assured me she wasn't blaming me, I couldn't help but feel ashamed of their actions. It was embarrassing to see them place all the blame on the wedding planner. My husband, however, offered a different perspective. He believed they got what they deserved and that I shouldn't worry too much about them. According to him, they brought this upon themselves by resorting to deceitful means to impress others. In hindsight, I realized my mother's disownment might have been a blessing in disguise. I no longer had to deal with their lies and manipulative tactics. It was time to move forward. I'm a 29-year-old guy who recently went through a divorce from my 27-year-old wife. It turned out she'd been cheating on me with my estranged brother, who's also 27. I found out 4 months ago when she revealed she was pregnant. At first, she tried to claim the baby was mine, but my brother's frequent visits made me suspicious. So, I checked her phone and found evidence. When I confronted her, she admitted to the affair because she felt she had no other choice. My relationship with my family had been rocky since I left home at 18. They always treated me like an outsider, especially compared to my brother, who was the favorite. When I discovered they threw him a party without me, pretending it was for me, it hit me hard. Instead of celebrating my own achievements, they prioritized him to avoid him feeling left out. It was a breaking point for me. After leaving home, I financed my college education through loans and work, then shared a small apartment with a friend. I cut off contact with my parents, and they didn't reach out to me either. Years passed, and last year my brother messaged me online, saying our parents missed me and wanted to reconnect. Despite everything, I'm considering it. About 2 years ago, I got married to my ex-wife, and life seemed pretty good. However, I realized I hadn't fully moved on from the issues with my parents. Eventually, I agreed to meet them. Though awkward at first, they were making an effort to mend things, so I decided to reciprocate by inviting them to my home. This turned out to be a mistake. When my brother met my ex-wife, they started an affair, and she became pregnant. Initially, I was thrilled about the pregnancy, assuming the baby was mine. But my brother's increased visits, especially after learning about the pregnancy, started bothering me. His behavior, like touching my wife's pregnant stomach and talking to the baby, made me uneasy. Despite my ex's reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that my brother had more involvement with the baby than he let on, especially 6 months into the pregnancy. I made the difficult decision to check my ex-wife's phone while she was asleep. And unfortunately, my worst fears were confirmed. The text messages between her and my brother proved that the baby she was carrying was actually his, and they had been together for quite some time. What's more, my ex had no intention of ever telling me the truth. They planned to reveal the affair after the baby was born, get a divorce from me, and then she would be with my brother. They intended to live off the child support I would be paying. The next morning, I confronted her about the texts. Although she initially tried to deny it, she eventually confessed. This marked the end of my 2-year marriage. Predictably, my parents sided with my brother and my ex. All their promises about treating us equally were just empty words. When my ex and my brother announced our divorce and her intention to marry him on social media, it felt like a final blow. My entire family fully supported my ex-wife and brother's decision, showing no concern for how it affected my mental health and shattered my trust. For 6 months, my ex had lied to me, claiming the baby was mine, adding to the pain of losing not just my wife, but also feeling like I lost a child. Despite my anguish, my parents insisted this was for the best and refused to acknowledge my brother's betrayal. Instead, they expected me to join in the celebrations of my ex and brother finding happiness together. Unable to bear their indifference and betrayal, I cut my family out of my life. Unfortunately, this decision also complicated my divorce. My ex-wife walked away with a significant settlement and even my car, all because my family sided with her due to her relationship with my brother. She and her lawyer fabricated a narrative painting me as toxic and controlling, despite her own choices, and my family reinforced these false claims by citing my supposed misogyny and temper issues. Despite losing a significant amount of money in the divorce, I was relieved to retain ownership of the house. Finalizing the divorce brought a sense of closure, and I was grateful to be done with the whole ordeal and never have to interact with those people again. Fortunately, there wasn't a waiting period for divorce where I live, and my ex-wife didn't contest it, allowing me to swiftly move on. It was challenging to move past everything, but I threw myself into my work and focused on self-improvement to put this unpleasant chapter behind me as quickly as possible. My efforts paid off when I received a promotion just 2 weeks ago, along with a better position, salary, and even a new company car. It was a fresh start, and I couldn't have been happier about it. After deciding to treat myself to a solo dinner at one of my favorite restaurants, I made the mistake of sharing it online. Within a day or two, my mother reached out, asking me to visit them. I was puzzled since we hadn't communicated since the divorce, and they sided with my ex-wife and her false accusations. At first, I tried to ignore her messages, but she persisted, calling me incessantly. Eventually, she showed up at my office and refused to leave, even getting into an argument with the receptionist, which was embarrassing. In order to get her to leave, I promised to visit in a few days, and that's how I finally convinced her to go. A couple of days later, I reluctantly visited my family. They had used the settlement money to move into a larger house to accommodate the new baby, who was born just over 3 weeks ago. I assumed they were also using the alimony to cover expenses, But it didn't bother me much as it was only a small portion of my salary at this point, and I could afford it. When I arrived, my brother wasn't home, and my ex was asleep, leaving just my parents to talk to me. I didn't engage in small talk and waited for them to address why they had called me there. After about 5 minutes of awkward silence, my father finally brought up the reason for the meeting. My brother had been fired from his job, and the alimony and settlement were no longer sufficient to support them. They had seen my promotion post and hoped I could help them out financially, given their dire situation. My parents had retired long ago, my brother was unemployed, and my ex wasn't planning to return to work anytime soon. The alimony couldn't cover the bills for a family of 5, especially with a newborn in the mix. While I understood the financial strain they were under, I was shocked that they had the audacity to ask me for help. After everything that had transpired, I was so stunned that I couldn't even muster a response for several minutes. Eventually, I snapped out of it and realized I didn't owe them anything. Without saying a word, I got up and left. As I reached the door and opened it, I was surprised to find my brother standing outside. My parents urged me to stay and listen, while my brother seemed alarmed to see me there. Still silent, I walked away, enduring the heavy rain that soaked me through. Feeling miserable and in a foul mood, I made my way to where I had parked my car outside their home. Then, something happened that I regret. My parents and brother followed me, and as I searched for my keys in my pocket, they pleaded with me for help one last time. It was unusual, especially coming from my typically smug and arrogant brother, a product of our parents' favoritism. They seemed genuinely desperate, but I couldn't contain my frustration. I lashed out, telling them to leave me alone and suggesting they beg on the streets if they were truly in such dire need, since a stranger might have more sympathy for their situation. After saying that, I got into my car and drove away, leaving them in the rain. I have to admit, it felt pretty good to leave my family behind, considering how they've mistreated me my whole life. It's been 2 days since then, and now I'm starting to doubt if I did the right thing. My mother has been texting me nonstop, and I can't shake off the guilt of not helping them out. I know I have the means to send them some money without it hurting me, but given everything that's happened, it feels like they're just using me. Frankly, I'm torn between helping them out with money, especially after they sided with my ex in the divorce. So I made the decision not to help them out. It was a significant choice for me because I felt incredibly guilty about potentially abandoning them. But then it hit me, they've been doing that to me my whole life. Even during the divorce, they threw me under the bus. So why should I hesitate to do the same to them? I told my mother to stop bothering me, warning her that I'd involve my lawyers if she kept it up, and it wouldn't be good for them. Naturally, that didn't sit well with them. A few days later, my brother showed up at my house to talk. He said he felt sorry for how we were treated during childhood, but he couldn't help being treated better because he was inherently superior. He also insisted I stop acting weird with our parents and just help them out like any normal child would. I couldn't help but laugh in his face at how ridiculous he sounded, spewing that nonsense. I told him that instead of trying to belittle me and manipulate me into helping them out, he should probably be out looking for a job and not wasting his time like this. That really seemed to hit a nerve because he started yelling at me, claiming I was just jealous that not only our parents but even my ex-wife preferred him over me. According to him, I was seeking revenge by refusing to give my family money. Instead of arguing with him, I simply agreed, saying that all I was doing was to get back at him, and there wasn't much he could do about it. That seemed to really get under his skin, and he threatened to come after me and force me to cough up the money one way or another. He warned me that I'd regret ever speaking to him that way. Honestly, I'm not taking any of that seriously at all. He can try to intimidate me all he wants, but I know he's not capable of doing anything to me. I'm completely unfazed by his threats. 3 days ago, my brother came by, attempting to persuade me to help them out, but he failed. My parents had already tried before, without success. So this time my ex decided to call me. I was hesitant to pick up, but I figured if I didn't, they'd likely come over and waste more of my time. So I answered. It was unbelievable how entitled and heartless these people could be. She started off politely, acknowledging that she and her family were struggling financially. Despite recognizing that I had no obligation to help them after everything they'd done to me, she urged me to consider being the bigger person. She tried to evoke sympathy by mentioning how my parents had provided for me growing up and how she had tried to be a good wife. Yeah, right. Except for the part where my parents favored my brother over me, and she ended up cheating on me with him. I used to complain about the situation, so her attempt at evoking sympathy fell flat. I told her that while I sympathized with their financial struggles, I was already spending a significant amount on unnecessary alimony for her. Technically, she didn't even deserve it since she cheated on me, but she managed to manipulate the situation because my family had no qualms about lying and making me out to be the bad guy for their benefit. She began crying on the call, accusing me of being selfish and heartless, which was ironic considering her actions. Even when faced with her tears, I remained firm in my decision not to help. She then threatened to involve the law, claiming I'd left her no choice but to demand higher alimony and drag me to court to humiliate me once again. Honestly, I'd like to see them try. The first time around, I was emotionally drained and depressed, not even bothering to fight back or prove them wrong. I just agreed to pay the alimony without contesting their claims. I was never toxic or controlling, despite their accusations, so she had no valid reason to cheat on me and didn't deserve a cent from the divorce. But I didn't care then. I just wanted to get the divorce over with, regardless of the financial toll. This time, though, I'm prepared to fight back and ensure my family learns a lesson they won't forget. In a surprising twist, my wife actually followed through on her threats and filed for a higher amount of alimony, citing my recent promotion. But this time, I wasn't going to let things go so easily. I reached out to all our mutual friends and laid out the truth about our situation, filling them in on past events since most of them were only aware of our separation and not the real reasons behind it. They were all understandably shocked, and I asked them to be prepared to testify against my wife if necessary, to which they agreed without hesitation. Additionally, I instructed my lawyer to push for discontinuing the entire alimony arrangement, as my wife clearly didn't deserve it. Over the past few days, I've been gathering all the evidence I could find of my parents' and brother's mistreatment towards me, showing how they never treated me as an equal and are now only hounding me for money because of my recent promotion. I've reached my breaking point, and I'm determined to rid myself of these toxic individuals once and for all. I made a conscious decision not to prioritize their feelings this time around. I managed to convince some of my cousins, who had witnessed my outsider treatment while growing up, to speak on my behalf. Despite not being particularly close, they agreed to support me. My lawyer was pleased with the evidence we had gathered, indicating it would likely lead to a successful case to stop paying alimony. While it was already known that my ex had cheated on me, her narrative portraying me as the villain and my brother as her savior were all based on lies. Even though I hadn't fought back last time, I was determined to set the record straight this time around, and I did just that. When confronted with video testimonials from friends and relatives supporting my side, my family had nothing to say for themselves. It seemed they expected to be let off the hook as easily as before, but I wasn't as emotionally fragile anymore. Their mistreatment had only made me stronger. Yesterday, it was officially finalized that I wouldn't have to pay my ex any alimony anymore, given the new information that surfaced. I felt like the happiest person on earth when I realized it was finally over. It was incredibly satisfying to see the smug look completely wiped off my family's faces. My ex looked like she was on the verge of tears, but I couldn't care less about her crying anymore. I was just done with the whole ordeal. I had planned to go home, treat myself to some great takeout, and watch a movie to celebrate, but as usual, my family had to ruin it. Just as I was a few yards away from my house, I noticed my brother's car parked outside. I was confused as to why he'd be there, but I went in anyway. To my surprise, my family was standing outside my door, blocking my way in. I was taken aback and didn't know what to say. But I decided to act like it didn't bother me and told them to get off my property or I'd call the police. That's when my dad spoke up, telling me that I should be ashamed of myself for what I'd done that day. He continued to lecture me, accusing me of lacking responsibility towards my family and betraying them by refusing to help when they needed it most. After he finished, I simply refused to engage in any conversation with him and stood there silently. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of provoking a reaction from me. It seemed like their goal was to get me so emotional that I'd eventually give in and do something rash and stupid. But I wasn't going to fall for it. Their desperate measures weren't going to help their case, which they should have realized by then. My silence seemed to only aggravate them further. Even though my mother demanded that I treat my dad with respect and talk to him, I still refused to speak. I could see they were getting increasingly agitated because they clearly hoped for a big fight, but nothing of the sort was happening. After more yelling, my brother finally snapped and grabbed me by the collar. He attempted to hit me, but my dad intervened just in time, pulling him back while shouting insults about me being a jealous loser who would never amount to anything. It was quite amusing coming from an unemployed guy still living with his parents and begging his brother for money to survive, but I digress. I warned them that they needed to leave or I'd call the cops. Given their financial situation, it seemed wise for them to make a run for it within the next 5 minutes. Reluctantly, they eventually left, but not before one last desperate attempt by my mother to shame me into giving them money. Of course, it didn't work, and they finally departed. It's been almost a day since then, and they haven't tried to contact me. I sincerely hope it stays this way. Now, on to the next chapter. My name is Lily. I live with Emily, who I consider to be like a real sister to me now. My parents passed away in an accident when I was starting high school. Since then, I've been living with my brother Owen. To be honest, I've always disliked Owen. When we were kids, he used to bully me a lot. He'd pull my hair, mess up my things, and even break my favorite toys. He'd laugh at me when I cried, and violence was just a normal thing with him. I had to put up with his mean comments all the time. I've hated Owen since I was little, and if he ever needed my help in the future, I'd probably say no. Owen is a selfish person. He always thinks he's the best and hates losing. He's the kind of person who would hurt others to get what he wants. After our parents died, an uncle offered to take us in, but Owen didn't want to go. I wasn't sure about leaving our home to live with a relative I barely knew, but Owen and I thought we could handle things on our own. Living alone was hard, but we managed. However, Owen and I stopped talking. He started going out at night and hanging out with rough people, which made me dislike him even more. A few years after Owen finished college and got a job, he suddenly brought home a girlfriend named Emily. She's really beautiful and elegant. I couldn't understand why someone as lovely as Emily would want to date someone as awful as Owen. I didn't think they were a good match, but I didn't say anything because it wasn't my place to judge. Emily said she was going to move in with us. I wondered if it was too sudden and if Emily was really okay with it. I had to ask her, "I'm fine with it, but are you sure you're okay, Emily?" We had a little disagreement with my dad, but my mom said it's an experience, and if her dad thinks it's reasonable, and they've all agreed, then I have nothing more to say. And so, a beautiful woman named Emily moved into our home. After living with her for a few months, I realized she's an amazing person. She took over all the household chores that I had been doing. At that time, I had graduated high school, but hadn't gone to college. I had no ambitions and was used to doing housework. Above all, I didn't have the confidence to do housework while going to university. But Emily encouraged me to find my passion, saying it's never too late. Ever since my parents passed away, my life had been a cycle of chores in school. I'd wake up, make breakfast, do laundry, go to school, and then come straight home to clean and make dinner. I didn't have time for friends or part-time jobs. I was living like a mom during what should have been an exciting time in high school. I didn't even have a boyfriend, not that I was interested, until Emily pointed it out. I hadn't realized I had no hobbies or passions. Looking back at my high school life, I felt a bit lonely. I remember talking with friends in middle school about wanting to get part-time jobs and boyfriends in high school. I decided to reconsider my future. I thought I'd start with a part-time job, but I didn't want to leave all the housework to Emily, so I helped her whenever I could. One day it struck me, is Emily actually amazing? I was pretty confident in my cooking skills, since I've been doing it ever since we lost our parents. I also often looked at books. Initially, I thought Emily, with her elegant demeanor, wouldn't have much experience with housework. I was wrong. Emily was perfect at cleaning, laundry, and especially cooking. Her cooking was so good she could be a pro. It made me wonder again why she was with Owen, who has such a terrible personality. I started to admire Emily. I thought of her as a real sister. She said she felt the same way about me. We even started going out for meals and hanging out. But Owen didn't seem to like that Emily and I were getting along so well. Years later, Owen found himself at the center of a major incident. One day, after several years had passed, I got a call. By this time, I had already moved out and was living on my own. The call was from Owen. For some reason, he was furious and yelled over the phone, "What are you doing on the day of the ceremony? You better not miss it." I responded, "What ceremony? I haven't received an invitation." Owen sounded puzzled and said, "Huh." But I decided to tell him the truth. Why Owen thought he could get married after doing what he did was beyond me. Let's rewind to the time when Emily started living with us. After Emily moved in, the bullying had mostly stopped. But there was a day when Owen became physically violent toward me. It started because Owen was angry at Emily. Owen would take a lunchbox to work that Emily prepared for him. But one day Emily overslept and couldn't make his lunch. Owen was furious about it. To me, it seemed like a minor issue. When Owen got home that day, I talked to him about the morning incident. Why get so mad at her for a missed lunch? Nobody's perfect. People oversleep sometimes, I said. I didn't mean anything deep by it, but Owen didn't like what I said and suddenly became enraged. A woman who's going to be my wife should be perfect at everything. It's your fault for being around and influencing her, he said. According to him, my presence was a bad influence on Emily. Of course, I argued back. I used to cry a lot as a kid, but now I speak my mind. We got into a heated argument, and suddenly Owen shoved me. Then he started kicking me. Just then, Emily returned from shopping and intervened. She was angry at Owen, but Owen didn't calm down. And then I saw something unbelievable. Owen slapped Emily. He then left the house and disappeared. I was left stunned and couldn't move for a while. Emily was also frozen, holding her slapped cheek, snapping back to reality. I approached Emily and asked, "Emily, are you okay?" She replied, "I'm fine," but tears were spilling from her eyes. She said sorry and retreated to her room. From that day on, Owen became increasingly aggressive toward Emily. One day, I decided to talk to Emily. I was worried because she was losing her usual brightness. Thinking a change of scenery might help, I took her outside, and she ended up confiding in me. She was unsure whether to go through with marrying Owen. I immediately said she should break it off, and that there was someone better out there for her. Emily seemed a bit surprised. Talking to me seemed to lift her spirits a bit. On the way home, I said to Emily, "I'll always be on your side, Emily." Emily cracked a small, somewhat sad smile. One day, I overheard Emily arguing with Owen, which was unusual for her. Curious, I asked what was going on. Turns out, Owen had gone ahead and set a wedding date without consulting her. No wonder Emily was upset, but what shocked me even more was this. Don't set a wedding date without even having a family meeting first. Apparently, Owen hadn't even met with Emily's parents yet. This was just beyond rude, and I was shocked he hadn't even taken this basic step. I immediately suggested that we go meet Em's parents. Owen told me to mind my own business, but this was no time for that. Emily quickly explained the situation to her parents, and they both went to visit them. Her face looked both exhausted and tired, which worried me. That day, only Owen returned home. I had a hunch about what happened and sent Emily a text. After a while, she replied, and we met up at a nearby cafe to discuss what had transpired. Long story short, her parents had objected to the marriage. I continued listening to the story, thinking that it must be so. I listened as she explained that Owen had set the wedding day without meeting them and had been treating her poorly recently, so they couldn't allow their daughter to marry him. Yet, Owen had already informed his workplace about the wedding date and even booked the venue, so he was in a tight spot now. I felt embarrassed for him. Emily's parents obviously didn't have a good impression of Owen. For the time being, Emily decided to stay at her parents' home to think things over. She said she wanted to think alone for a while. Owen objected, of course, but he was persuaded by her parents and returned home alone. I asked Emily if I could meet her parents. She was puzzled but agreed. Since I insisted, later I met with Emily's parents and apologized for Owen's rudeness. They were quite surprised, not just by the apology, but that someone as considerate as me could be related to Owen. I then shared everything about Owen, about Emily, and about how Owen had been treating her. I asked Emily again, "Do you still want to marry Owen?" Emily responded, "I'm not sure." I suggested she should have a serious talk with Owen. She agreed, but when she tried to contact him to talk, Owen wasn't interested in discussing anything. Worse, he was still moving forward with the wedding plans. He even sent Emily a list asking her to prepare the invitations. At this point, Emily had had enough and finally decided to break up with Owen. She tried multiple times to discuss the matter with Owen, but it seemed like they could never have a real conversation. Every time she reached out, Owen would dominate the conversation and end it abruptly. She even texted him about breaking up, but Owen dismissed it, saying, "Enough with the jokes. Just prepare for the wedding." So the day Owen unilaterally decided would be their wedding day arrived, and Emily contacted me in a fury. I couldn't help but marvel at how well Owen had planned the wedding without giving it much thought. I gave him a piece of my mind. "You never took your conversations with Emily seriously, and honestly, I can't fathom why you think you can get married. No one's coming to this wedding. Plus, you quit your job without telling anyone. You've lost all credibility with that." I hung up the phone. That's right. Owen had quit his job without telling anyone. Emily found out about this during an incident, and Owen had contacted her as well. Emily and I were together at the time, expecting his call. I thought I would definitely get a call. "What's going on? Why aren't you coming? Why isn't anyone coming? I've told you multiple times that I want to break up. You never listened. You even went ahead and planned a wedding, so I thought you might as well go ahead with it." Emily finally told Owen everything. She hadn't sent out invitations because she didn't want to get married, but he had told people at work about the date, so she contacted them to cancel the wedding to avoid causing them any inconvenience. That's when she first heard that Owen had quit his job. She intended to talk to Owen again, but given his usual attitude, she decided to let it go, saying goodbye and hung up. After hanging up, Emily looked relieved and refreshed. She apologized to me, but I was more than satisfied with the outcome. In the end, Owen had brought this upon himself. He never took his relationship with Emily seriously and made all the decisions on his own. If he had taken the time to have a serious conversation with Emily, things might have turned out differently, but that's neither here nor there now. Emily has been worried about living alone. I had anticipated this and had already decided to move out and live on my own. I had even finalized the lease and just needed to move later. After moving, Emily and I continued to be as close as best friends. I told her I would miss her as if she were my sister, but she assured me there was no need to part ways. Since then, we've gone out for meals, hung out, and even traveled together. I spend my days working part-time, trying to find what I really wanted to do. Emily, being the incredibly capable and thoughtful person she is, also started a part-time job where I worked. Emily is the whole package: beautiful, talented, and incredibly considerate. She quickly became popular at work. One day, Emily mentioned she might be getting stalked by someone. Given how amazing she is, it wasn't surprising. Worried, I decided to accompany her home whenever possible. Then, one day, it happened. Emily was attacked on her way home. I couldn't be with her that day because I was sick. I thought the stalker had given up, but it turns out they were just waiting for Emily to be alone. She was almost dragged into an alley, but a passerby happened to rescue her. Emily was surprised to see the person attacking her. It turned out to be my older brother, Owen. Owen was arrested. I heard about it the next day. During police questioning, Owen admitted he had been stalking Emily, waiting for an opportunity. He acted because I wasn't there to protect her. Hearing this broke my heart. As much as I despised Owen, I never thought someone from our own family would commit a crime. Emily was shocked, of course, but I was even more devastated. I apologized to Emily and her parents and thanked the person who saved her. Emily's parents were very kind to me. "If you don't mind, would you like to live with me?" Emily suggested. But I decided to move out for now and return to my parents' house. It was empty now that Owen was arrested, but I couldn't bear to leave a house filled with memories of my parents and childhood. Emily suggested we could live there together. After some thought, I accepted her offer. So here we are, living together in my old home. Today, we're visiting my parents' graves. Emily came with me. In front of my parents' tombstones, I silently apologized for Owen's crime and my failure to stop him. All because I couldn't stand him. Hi, I'm Katie, and I work as a nurse. My husband's name is Jack. Right now, he's staying home and taking care of the house full-time. Not long ago, Jack was working at a company, but he decided to quit because he didn't get along with his new boss who was transferred to his department. When Jack told me he quit, I was upset that he made such a big decision without discussing it with me first. But I tried to see the positive side of things, thinking maybe it was better for him to leave the job before it made him unhappy. Even though Jack isn't bringing in any money anymore, I have a job as a nurse, and the house we live in was inherited from my late mother, so we don't have to worry about paying rent. This means we can still live comfortably. At first, I was worried and stressed about Jack not working, but he was doing a great job taking care of the house, so I started to get used to it and even enjoy having him at home. Then one day, when I came back from work, I found my sister-in-law Brittany visiting. Jack hadn't told me she was coming over, which annoyed me a bit, but I noticed that Jack seemed happier than usual. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but I asked Jack to let me know in advance next time. He agreed and asked Brittany to leave, but she wanted to stay the night. Jack looked worried and politely asked her to go home for the night, saying it was too sudden for her to stay over. When Jack told Brittany she needed to leave, she gave me a hostile look and stormed out angrily. I wondered why Brittany had come over, especially considering the distance she had to travel. It turned out Brittany had recently gone through a divorce and had nowhere else to stay. She had briefly moved in with my parents, but their place was small, and they were pressuring her to find a job and contribute financially, which made her feel unwelcome. I felt sorry for her situation. Initially, I was frustrated with my husband for letting Brittany stay without consulting me. But then Jack explained that he'd been feeling down because he couldn't find a job, and he just wanted someone to listen to him for a change. Despite my annoyance, I understood his need for support. Although I was annoyed with Jack's actions, I realized he needed someone to talk to. So I reluctantly agreed that it was better for Brittany to stay than for her to be alone in her situation. However, I made it clear to Jack that he needed to inform me before inviting guests over in the future. I briefly wondered if I was spoiling Jack too much by letting him get away with things like this, but I decided not to dwell on it. I made sure to confirm with Jack that he understood the need for communication next time and didn't bring it up again that day. 2 days later, while I was at work, Jack texted me, asking if it was okay for Brittany to come over again. He mentioned that I would be working until 9 p.m. and assured me that he would make sure she left before then. Even though Brittany had just been over recently, Jack seemed eager for her to visit again. Feeling a bit uneasy about Brittany's frequent visits, I agreed reluctantly, telling Jack to ensure she left as soon as possible. I wasn't thrilled about Brittany coming over again, but seeing Jack so happy about it made me decide to let him enjoy his time with his sister. During my busy day at work, I completely forgot about Brittany's visit. However, when I got home, I was surprised to find her still there. I asked why she was still around, and Jack quickly realized I was upset. He apologized, admitting that he had been seeking advice from Brittany without keeping track of the time. Jack promptly told Brittany it was time for her to leave. She seemed annoyed but eventually packed her things and left after a bit of hesitation. I expressed my frustration with Brittany's behavior, questioning why she couldn't sense when it was time to go home. Jack defended her, saying she had come all the way to our house just to lend him an ear. Despite feeling that they could have met up somewhere else, I was too exhausted to argue further and apologized for saying too much. Feeling drained, I decided to excuse myself and rest, although I sensed Jack might have wanted to discuss something more with me. The next day, I had a day off, so I was relaxing at home when Jack brought up what had happened the day before and apologized. He admitted that he was wrong to expect me to get along with Brittany right away, especially considering how busy I had been. Realizing that I hadn't been making enough time for Jack lately, and understanding his desire for me to bond with his sister, I acknowledged his apology and expressed regret for saying too much the previous day. Jack seemed relieved that we were able to talk things through. He even promised to make my favorite dish, meatball pasta, for dinner. As he started cooking, his phone rang. I asked who was calling, and he mentioned it was Brittany. Despite feeling uneasy about it, I suggested he answer in case it was urgent. Jack picked up the phone, but I couldn't hear their conversation, and the call ended quickly. "How's Brittany?" I asked Jack, and he replied, "She said she has something to tell me, so she's coming over here now." I couldn't understand why Brittany had to come over on my day off, and it irritated me. But since she was already on her way, I didn't say anything about it. "Okay, I'll go make Brittany's pasta too," Jack said happily and began cooking. He didn't realize I was upset, and I couldn't understand why he didn't refuse her from coming over. However, I saw it as an opportunity to speak with her directly. 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Since our house was far from where Brittany was staying, I wasn't expecting her, but it was indeed Brittany at the door, with a large suitcase in tow. I had a very bad feeling about this, but I let her into the house. While Jack was still busy preparing lunch, I decided to ask Brittany directly what had happened. She appeared upset and tearful as she explained that she had been kicked out by her parents because she wasn't working, and they felt she was freeloading off them. As I listened to Brittany's story, my fears started to materialize. Jack reacted strongly, expressing his anger at Brittany's parents and calling them horrible for not supporting their own daughter. His outburst irritated me, but I chose to stay quiet and let Brittany continue. She explained that she had nowhere else to go and asked if she could stay with us. Feeling uncomfortable with the idea of Brittany living with us, I attempted to refuse, but Jack quickly interjected, saying there was no other option and that we had a spare room she could use. I shot Jack a glare, but he seemed oblivious to my discomfort. He justified his decision by saying that Brittany needed help. Unable to hold back any longer, I expressed my frustration, reminding Jack that he wasn't currently working either, and adding that I couldn't support 2 unemployed people on my salary alone. At that moment, something struck me on the head, and I was momentarily disoriented. Brittany, laughing hysterically, pointed out that Jack had thrown an egg at me. When I touched my hair, I felt the eggshells, realizing what had happened. Brittany blamed me for the incident, insisting that I should be nicer to her. Then Jack threatened me, saying that if I continued to have a bad attitude towards Brittany, he would divorce me. He reminded me that if we divorced, I would have to leave the house. Jack seemed pleased with himself, and Brittany looked satisfied as well. Since I remained silent, they assumed I had been convinced by their ultimatum. They asked if I was ready to apologize and suggested I take a shower before we discussed living together as 3. While Jack happily finished preparing lunch, Brittany relaxed on the couch, watching TV and snickering at me. Despite wanting to speak my mind, I decided to take action instead. I grabbed Brittany's luggage and threw it off the balcony. Both Jack and Brittany were shocked by my sudden action, demanding to know what I was doing and accusing me of being out of my mind. Jack panicked and told me to retrieve the thrown items, but I refused, asserting that it was my house, and I wouldn't tolerate their behavior any longer. Jack retorted, asserting that as husband and wife, the house belonged to both of us, and he had every right to allow his sister to stay there. I scoffed at his claim, finding it amusing, which only seemed to agitate him further. He insisted that he was the true owner of the house because it had been inherited from his mother, implying that I had no rights to it. Both Jack and Brittany appeared surprised by this revelation, but they quickly dismissed it, arguing that even if Jack owned the house, we were still married, so it didn't matter. Ignoring their mumbling, I reiterated that the house was mine regardless of ownership and questioned why they were so insistent on Brittany staying with us. I suggested that if they wanted to live together so badly, they should find their own place to rent. Furthermore, I pointed out that it was unreasonable for me to support two people who weren't working. While I had initially understood Jack's decision to quit his job, I now noticed that he wasn't even contributing to household chores anymore. Feeling frustrated and overwhelmed, I decided to be honest with Jack about my feelings. When I told him that I would rather live alone, he reacted defensively, expressing disappointment and criticizing my inability to take care of our family. He even went as far as to present me with divorce papers. As Jack handed me the divorce papers, I couldn't help but notice Brittany's smug expression, realizing she had likely influenced this decision. It became clear that she had orchestrated the situation to her advantage. Without much choice, I was left alone to contemplate my next move. Jack and Brittany left, giving me time to think, with Jack implying that I should apologize if I wanted to salvage our relationship. Feeling pressured and unsure of what else to do, I hastily showered, filled out my part of the divorce papers, and submitted them, resigning myself to the reality of our situation. It seems like my husband showed me the divorce papers to scare and threaten me, even though it was Brittany's idea. He went along with it, and I realized I didn't want a husband who would do such a thing to his own wife. A few days later, Jack called, asking if I was ready to apologize. I was furious with him for talking down to me, so I responded by asking why he wasn't the one calling me sooner. He seemed confused, so I explained that I had submitted the divorce papers and it was finalized. I also mentioned that I sold a house and quit my job, starting fresh somewhere else. I informed him that I sent his belongings to his parents' place, though I was worried they might not all fit in their small house. Jack seemed unaware of what was happening and sounded like he was arguing with someone else on the phone. I decided I had nothing more to say to him and blocked his number. A few months later, I visited my old neighborhood and saw Jack working at a supermarket. He seemed to be having trouble at work, being scolded by a younger woman while other workers chuckled. I felt a bit sorry for him, but there was nothing I could do. He was just a stranger to me now. Perhaps if Jack had handled his relationship with his sister differently, this situation might have been avoided. But regardless, I'm glad I divorced him because I'm enjoying my life as a single person now. You're already married, aren't you? Going back to your parents' house is just too easy. If you go back, don't ever come back to this house again. Kate yelled this at me, blocking my path. I just nodded silently, understanding her message. I won't come back, so I'll go home to my parents. My name is Jess Liu. My husband and I have been together since middle school and ended up marrying each other. We'd only had eyes for each other since our first love. Both our parents were thrilled with how well we got along, and it helped that they were friends since we're from the same hometown. The reason we moved into Lewis's family's house after getting married was because they had a spacious home with extra rooms. We got married right after college and had been saving money appropriately for our age. But both sets of parents told us it would be fine to live together until we saved up some more money. So we ended up living in Lewis's family home, where a room was waiting for us. Both Louis and I were exhausted from adjusting to our new lives when we started our first jobs. We felt grateful that we could live with his family, My in-laws treated me like their own daughter, and there was absolutely no issue in mine and Louis' married life. That is until Lyra came back home. Lyra is Lou's older sister, 2 years his senior. She had been mean to me ever since I started dating Lou in middle school. She said things like I wasn't good enough for him or that he had poor taste. Louis always defended me and wondered why Lyra would say such things. Lyra worked for a company that required her to relocate, and she moved to the city shortly after starting her job. One of the reasons I agreed to move into Lou's family home was because Lyra wasn't there. Another reason was because if Lyra had still been living there, I would have flat out refused to move in, but fate had other plans. Lyra was reassigned to her hometown. When I shared my concerns with Louis, he said, "Lyra is an adult now. She won't say anything weird." It's true that the times Lyra bullied me were back in high school. After she went to college, she rarely came home, and we stopped running into each other. Even at our wedding, although she didn't speak to me, I remember seeing Lyra crying. It made me think maybe we could get along, but that was a big mistake. After returning home, Lyra acted normally toward me in front of Lou and his parents. I thought maybe she had matured and her edginess was gone. But then, one day when I luckily had some time off, I was enjoying a book in our room. Lyra, who also happened to be off that day, walked in without knocking. "Hey, how long are you going to laze around? Could you hurry up and make some food? I'm hungry," Lyra said, wearing a look she'd never show in front of Louis or his parents. Taken aback by Lyra's eyes filled with what seemed like hatred, I put down my book and said, "All right, let's make some food," and headed to the kitchen. Drinking in the middle of the day, Lyra acted as though I should naturally be the one cooking. She'd never act this way when Lou and his parents were around. Feeling deceived, wondering if she'd been hiding her true self all this time, I quickly made lunch. Lyra took one bite, then stood up with her plate. "There's no way I can eat something this terrible, Jessie. Why did you even marry Louis? He really doesn't know how to pick them," she said, glaring at me. Lyra took her plate straight to the trash, throwing away the food I had made right in front of me. "Go buy some alcohol. After eating your awful cooking, it feels like my tongue is rotting." "I want to disinfect it with alcohol, so go get some now," she demanded. I was pretty steamed. But I had planned on going shopping anyway, so I got her some alcohol to spite her. I bought non-alcoholic beer. Lyra was furious. I retorted, "Don't treat me like a minion," which escalated into an argument. Still mad, Lyra retreated to her room. When Louis came home, she instantly switched back to her gentle demeanor, a quick change that sent shivers down my spine. That night, I discussed Lyra with Louis. But for some reason, his attitude was cold lately. Every time he looked at me, his expression was complicated. We used to always share the double bed, but now he's sometimes sleeping on the living room couch. When I asked why, he said, "Just couldn't sleep, so I stayed in the living room." I've been wondering what's going on ever since. I was saddened by his sudden coldness. When Louis said, instead of blaming Lyra, "Don't you think you have some things to reflect on yourself?" I couldn't help but tear up. Since middle school, Louis has always been kind to me, and yet I've been troubled lately by his sudden coldness. Being mistreated by Lyra and now feeling this coldness from Louis felt like salt being rubbed into an emotional wound. I couldn't help but cry. Louis looked surprised, but he didn't comfort me, seeming perplexed. He paced around for a bit before sitting down next to me, who was sitting on the bed with a determined look on his face. "There's something I've been meaning to ask but haven't." "What is it?" "Are you having an affair?" I was so surprised by the sudden mention of affair that my tears stopped. "I swear, my heart has never strayed from Louis," I said, shaking my head. "No, I'm not. Why would you ask something like that?" Louis then showed me a picture on his phone. The picture showed me talking to a man who had his hand on my shoulder. Both the man and I were smiling, but this was by no means a photo of infidelity. "You're mistaken. Look closely. Yeah, he's put on some weight, but that's Andy, our classmate. Don't you remember him? He was on the baseball team. This was taken when we bumped into each other after so long. and he said, "You look well," and patted my shoulder. Louis zoomed in on the photo and said, "Really, Andy?" With a skeptical look, frowning, and looking closely at the man's face, Louis asked, "Is that really Andy? Andy is getting married soon. There's no way I'd have an affair. Why would you even suspect that?" "Well, Lyra sent me this picture, saying you were cheating. She also said she saw you coming home late with Andy recently, and then she sent me this photo." "Why would you believe Lyra over me? Is that why you've been cold to me?" "Sorry, you have been coming home late, and I was worried. I've become a senior at work too, so sometimes I come home late because I'm teaching my colleagues." "I see. Oh, thank goodness." Lou breathed a sigh of relief. Slightly tapping his back as a little payback for doubting me, I said, "Geez." Louis apologized again. From then on, Louis changed his attitude and started treating me kindly like he used to. It was good to get back to being a loving couple. But my distrust towards Lyra increased. I became convinced that Lyra wanted to kick me out of this home for some reason. So I started wondering how to expose her true colors in front of my in-laws. On another day when Lyra and I both had time off, Lyra came and demanded that I make lunch like she used to. "Why can't you be considerate? Do you know what time it is? Hurry up and make lunch," she said. "But it's only 10 o'clock a.m. It feels too early for lunch to me." "Lyra, you can make something if you want. You cook on your days off, don't you?" "What? Cooking is a wife's job, isn't it? I only do chores to keep the family harmony, you know." Just as I'm getting frustrated with Lyra urging me to cook, my phone rings. Ignoring Lyra, who's been drinking since the morning, I answer the call. My mom's voice comes through sounding urgent. "Jesse, oh thank goodness you picked up. Your dad's in trouble. He tripped at the front door and seems to have hurt his ankle." I can tell from my mom's voice she's really flustered, and I sense this is an emergency for my parents. "I'm coming right now. Just wait," I say as I hang up the phone and start to get ready. Lyra, who had just told me to cook, now looked annoyed as she saw me getting ready to go out. "What are you doing?" "It looks like my dad got injured. So I'm going to my parents' house," I explained. "You're married now, aren't you? Going back to your parents' house is too lenient. If you're going home, don't bother coming back here," Lyra retorted, blocking my way out. I couldn't take it anymore. Why do I have to deal with this kind of spiteful attitude? I thought to myself. I was absolutely fed up with being treated so unfairly by Lyra. "Fine, I won't come back. I'll go to my parents' house," I stated calmly. Lyra stepped aside with a pleased expression. "Don't ever come back," she cheerfully said as she saw me off at the door, her alcohol stench unbearable. Rushing back home, I found my dad's ankle was severely bruised. Mom was visibly panicked, so I drove him to the hospital where they confirmed it was a severe sprain. Due to the condition, my dad had no choice but to use crutches, so I decided to stay with my parents for a while. I thought this was a good opportunity, especially since Lyra had told me not to come back. I informed Louis and my in-laws over the phone about my dad's injury and my strained relationship with Lyra, letting them know that I'd be staying at my parents' home for a while. My in-laws said they would talk some sense into Lyra. Louis then said, "Well, I'll come live at your family's home too." My parents get along well with Louis, so they were pleased. Though a bit apologetic for the inconvenience, I received a text from Lyra saying, "Why would you tell my parents? Aren't you embarrassed to tattle like a child?" I just read it and ignored. It seems Louis got a text from Lyra saying, "Aren't you coming back? Living at Jess's family home must be tough." Louis responded, "I'll go where Jessie is." We didn't hear from Lyra after that. My dad's recovery was slower than expected. He spent about 3 months on crutches and in a wheelchair. My dad seemed both grateful and happy for Louis's various help around the house. Just when I was feeling grateful for being married to Lou, Lyra sent a shocking message my way. "I'm bringing my boyfriend over. Since you're technically my sister-in-law, you have permission to come home for just 1 day. Be polite and greet him properly. Don't say anything unnecessary," the message read. I felt repulsed by the selfishness of her text, but the message Lyra sent to Louis was even more off-putting. Her message said, "My boyfriend is coming to greet the family, so come home, Louis. I might be getting married, but you'll always be important to me." Louis commented, "Lyra's texts are always so poetic, aren't they? But thanks to my woman's intuition, I had a good idea of how Lyra really felt about Louis. To protect Louis and our marriage, I decided to turn this meeting into a stage for my revenge. Regardless of how Lyra's boyfriend might feel, after being allowed to return to my in-laws' house after a long time, I received multiple apologies from them. They told me Lyra was going to pick up her boyfriend and that they'd make sure she apologized to me afterwards. Oh, it's fine. As long as Lyra stops being malicious, that's all I really want," I replied with a genuine smile. "Plus, I'm sure that after my revenge, Lyra won't dare to be nasty to me anymore." The man Lyra brought with her seemed serious enough. What shocked Louis and my in-laws the most was how much Lyra's boyfriend looked like Louis. From the aura to the facial features, they were identical, leaving my in-laws exchanging surprised glances. It was clear that Lyra's boyfriend also noticed the resemblance as he stood there in surprise. Lyra cheerfully said, come on in, come on in." Louis whispered to me, "Isn't that guy way too similar to me? I told you so, didn't I?" I had let Louis know beforehand that I was planning some revenge. Louis had told me I didn't have to go that far. But when I explained my reasons, he seemed torn between believing me or not. However, after seeing the guy's face, Lou seemed to finally understand why I felt the need for revenge. Though the awkward expression on Lou's face showed his mixed feelings, my resolve to make Lyra learn her lesson the hard way was reaffirmed. "My name is Jackson. I'm considering marriage with Lyra. Nice to meet you all." Jackson introduced himself politely. My in-laws welcomed Jackson's polite introduction with smiles. Lyra seemed really happy and started downing drinks like there's no tomorrow. Jackson, who had seemed a little tense, started to relax more thanks to my in-laws' warm demeanor. As we all were engaged in light conversation, a tipsy Lyra rested her head on Lou's shoulder, not Jackson's. "Ah, this is fun. Louis, you must be feeling lonely, huh, knowing that I'm getting married?" Lyra remarked. "No, not at all. You know, Jackson here looks just like Louis. That's why I thought about getting married," she continued. The resemblance between Jackson's face and Lou had been the elephant in the room, something nobody had mentioned until now. But Lyra, probably due to being intoxicated, not only brought it up but also revealed that it was her reason for considering marriage. The atmosphere changed immediately as Lyra's words turned my in-laws' faces pale. Lyra, realizing she may have said too much, tried to laugh it off. "Just kidding," she said, but I didn't let this opportunity slip away. "Lyra, you can't be serious," I interjected before my father-in-law could say anything more. "I can't bear to let this sad tale come from my in-laws' mouths, and more importantly, I need Lyra to realize that Lou is my husband, not just a family friend. Jackson, did you know? I hate to spill family secrets, but Lyra and Louis are not actually blood related. My in-laws had children from previous marriages and then got remarried," I said, looking at Lyra in surprise. Lyra quickly put distance between herself and Louis and glared at me. Undeterred, I took out my phone and placed it on the table. "I've had my suspicions for a while. Lyra has been treating me poorly, and I've wondered why," I explained. As I said this, I pressed the play button on the voice recorder app on my phone. What flowed out were the sounds of Lyra berating me. The recording was filled with Lyra's desperate voice saying things like, "Break up with Louis and leave this house." Realizing the gravity of the situation, my in-laws uttered in despair, "This can't be." I turned to Lyra, who was now biting her lip and pale as a ghost, and gave her a smile. "Lyra, you've had feelings for Lou for a long time, haven't you? That's why you've been trying to drive me away," I confronted her. "No, that's not it. Louis is my precious younger brother," Lyra protested. "Then why did you plan to marry Jackson because he looks like Louis?" I questioned her. "Well, that's..." Lyra stuttered, caught off guard. Jackson, you told me that you met Lyra in a bar, right? What was that encounter like? I asked Jackson. Caught off guard by the sudden question, Jackson replied with a trembling voice. We met while I was drinking in a bar. She told me she liked my face. That's how it all started. My mother-in-law let out a sorrowful "oh" and started to cry, while my father-in-law looked at Lyra with a serious expression. Finally breaking his silence, Lyra's biological father, my father-in-law, asked, Lyra, did you have feelings for Louis? The heartful greeting I had prepared for Lyra's future husband was because I'd realized she had her sights set on Louis. Although Lyra herself never admitted it, her behavior over time made it increasingly obvious that she saw Louis not just as a brother, but as a man, I explained. Suddenly, Lyra burst into tears and buried her face in the table. I couldn't help it. I've loved him ever since our parents got married when I was in elementary school, and I met Louis. There are stories like this in girls' comics, where the parents remarry and their children start dating. I had always dreamed that would happen with Louis and me, and then you came along and stole him. Lyra sobbed. Listening to Lyra's tearful outburst, Jackson started to complain of a headache and said he was leaving. Lyra clung to Jackson, but her father intervened, saying he'd go apologize to Jackson later. Lyra was clearly distraught, crying uncontrollably, but neither Lou nor I could do anything to console her. Louis, I've always seen you as a real sister, but that's all it's ever been. Lou addressed Lyra, who was sobbing uncontrollably. For a moment, her cries quieted down, but then she burst into loud, childlike sobs again. I felt some pity, but it didn't change the fact that Lyra had been mean to me, Lou, and I left for my parents' home. Later, we learned that Lyra had been diagnosed with alcohol dependency at the hospital. She was also found to be mentally unstable and had taken time off work to isolate herself. After talking it over with my in-laws, Louis and I finally decided to move out and start our life together. My in-laws kept apologizing to me, but I told them there was no need. Love can make people do crazy things after all. I couldn't forgive what Lyra had done, but I did feel sorry for her. I hope she can move on from her feelings for Lou and find a new direction in life. Louis and I got off to a great start living together. We rented a house close to both our parents so we could easily help them if needed. Starting this new chapter brought back the excitement we felt as newlyweds. Lou and I plan to continue being a loving couple and live happily ever after. One day, my husband asked me, "Hey, how much money do we have in that safe?" I chuckled and replied, probably around $500,000 in total now. The next day, when I got home, there was a signed divorce paper on the living room table, and both my husband and the safe were gone. My name is Helen, and I'm a 58-year-old working housewife. I still work hard at my job. You see, my hobby is saving money. When I was a child, my mother opened a savings account for me. She told me that depositing money in the bank made the numbers in my passbook grow, and I found that very enjoyable. I started depositing a little bit at a time, starting with just $1, and enjoyed watching it grow. So when my savings grew by a few cents in interest each year, it was a delightful surprise to my young self. Being fond of money and how it works, I worked as a financial planner and gave advice on managing assets. One day, a friend from college told me, an old childhood friend is in serious trouble due to debt. Could you give him some advice? So, I decided to meet with him and my friend. This old friend was a handsome man with a refreshing smile. My friend explained that despite his looks, he loves gambling and is struggling to make ends meet. I thought you, Helen, might have some good advice, my friend said. His name was Mark. As I listened to his story, Mark admitted he loved gambling, just like his parents. Even worse, he'd had taken on his parents' debt. Of course, he seemed to be quite worried. I found his troubled expression rather endearing. Because my friend had asked, I gladly agreed to help him. Looking back now, perhaps I had a bit of a crush on him, but I never imagined that this would lead to a series of troublesome events. Anyway, I advised Mark to consolidate his debts and reduce his monthly payments so he can manage his life somehow. Not long after, Mark and I started dating. That friend of mine opposed it, saying I wouldn't recommend being with him. But we went ahead and got married. I thought that getting married would help us face Mark's debt together. My income is pretty good for my age group. Therefore, most of Mark's income went towards his debt, and I made sure he cut ties with his parents to prevent the debt from increasing further. I gave Mark a monthly allowance of $500. When Mark decided to cut ties, his mother yelled, "Ungrateful child. I wish I'd never given birth to you." It's only natural for a child to repay their parents' debts. His father also said, "Where's that thieving cat? I can't rest until I give her a piece of my mind. You don't belong to us." My husband Mark, exhausted from having to deal with my in-laws' debts all this time, finally told them, "Enough is enough. I'm not your ATM. I'm trying my best here," and came back to me. He finally felt relieved to be free from my in-laws constantly bringing up their debts. Soon after, we had a son. Our son Kevin is handsome, just like Mark. He's my pride and joy. Kevin seemed to pick up on his father's lack of discipline and indecisiveness, just as our son had noticed Mark's carefree character didn't change. Borrowing money from predatory lenders, dealing with loan sharks, tricking friends into lending him money to gamble it away. We went through a lot, but I managed to keep Mark in line. As 23 years went by, and recently we finally got down Mark's debt to about $10,000, we're almost at full repayment. At that moment, Mark received a call from his parents. "Please help us. Your father has collapsed. We're at the hospital now. Can you come?" Mark left work early and came to the hospital. Then he messaged me, "Helen, Dad collapsed. I'm at the hospital now. I'm sorry I broke our promise and went to see my parents. I'm really sorry." "What? Your dad collapsed? So how is he now?" I asked. "He had a minor stroke. His life isn't in danger, but he shouldn't overexert himself. Both my parents are feeling low. I want to stay with them for a while. Is that okay?" Mark replied. "Of course, honey. Go and comfort them." "Should I come too?" I inquired. "No, it's okay if you're busy with work, and they might treat you poorly again," Mark responded. I started giving Mark a little extra money for his hospital visits. They probably couldn't afford the hospital fees. Since then, Mark seems to visit his parents often. Each time, he took $200 to $300 from me. I guess my in-laws are struggling financially and are taking a little bit from Mark. It amounted to around $1,000 to $2,000 a month, but I let it slide for now. A year has passed since my father-in-law collapsed. Both my in-laws have aged, and I guess they wanted someone to lean on. My hobby, as always, is saving money. One day, I took out my bank book from the vault and grinned. Usually Mark, who wasn't interested in me, stared at me and asked, "Hey, how much money do we have in that bank account you always look at so happily?" "It's about $500,000 now," I answered casually. But the next morning, I found divorce papers filled out in the living room, and both Mark and the safe were gone. As I was having breakfast, I couldn't help but smile. I knew Mark had been eyeing the money in the vault. Moreover, he had planned to take the entire vault. He's really not smart, but imagining him carrying the whole vault almost made me burst out laughing. We have a black cat named Luna. We've installed a pet camera to watch her. Luna's adorable antics are the healing moments of my day. There I was, watching that camera during my lunch breaks. No matter when I look, my child is just adorable. One day, as I switched on the camera, there they were in our living room on a weekday, my in-laws and my husband Mark. And they were having an unbelievable conversation. "Oh, you're living in such a nice house, Mark. Let's have a good salary makes your mother so proud," they said, flattering my husband. "Indeed, I am proud," responded Mark's father. "You know, I make a pretty decent salary myself, but Helen takes all of it, so I only get an allowance of $500 a month," Mark said. "Oh, you poor thing. You've been working so hard." "Your mother understands," they consoled. "I can't believe she takes all your salary and only gives you $500 a month." That's outrageous. You should be getting more. Why are you obeying such a tyrant like Helen? You could be living much better on your own. They continued. You're our pride, Mark. You could have saved hundreds of thousands by now. But she's just exploiting you. You poor thing, they said as my mother-in-law began to sob. Yeah, I've been thinking the same thing. You guys are right, Mark agreed. What is he talking about? He seemed to have completely forgotten that I've been working hard to pay off his debt. I wonder what's going on inside their heads. Moreover, in the past, who was burdened with debt from his parents and had to give them cash every month, making it difficult for him to get by? You know, she has a bank book with tons of savings stashed away. It's not fair that I only get 500. Mark complained. The moment he said that, my in-laws' eyes lit up. They exchanged glances. So, how much is in the bank book? They leaned in eagerly, awaiting his answer. Last I heard, I think it was around $400 or $500, Mark said. Mark, isn't that money rightfully yours? They asked. It might not match the effort you've put in, but isn't it money you should be receiving? Yeah, I guess you're right. I'm starting to think the same thing, Mark conceded. Despite his good looks, Mark is indecisive and easily influenced by others. I used to find this indecisiveness endearing and devoted myself to him wholeheartedly. We've managed to reduce his nearly $200,000 debt down to $10,000. Yet it looks like he's being manipulated by his parents again, and they're about to touch my precious savings. Seeing this scene was so pathetic. I was at my desk at work, tears streaming down my face as I held my phone. I've been putting aside my living expenses from our using his income, mostly to pay off the debt. On top of that, I was providing him with an allowance of $500 out of my own earnings. Despite explaining this to Mark, it seems he's completely forgotten what these past 23 years have been for. I felt so sad and pitiful, my heart aches as if I was drowning in my own tears. It's not like I felt like I was disappearing, on the verge of breaking, but I made sure to record the conversation and sent the data to my son. That day, I left work early due to sickness. I went to my usual bar and drank heavily, spilling out everything to the bartender. In such a state, the bartender comforted me gently. He casually said, "Why do you grieve such a person? You did nothing wrong. There's no need to live for them. Live for yourself." At that moment, all my intoxication and love for my husband faded. "Thank you, sir. Next time, we'll share a pleasant dream," I said to the bartender. I went back home after I said that to the bartender. Entering my study, I began to think, how would I steal the bank book inside that vault? I couldn't even begin to imagine, but I needed to devise a plan. I will show them hell. They shouldn't underestimate me. I concentrated harder than usual. Gathering evidence was the first step. From then on, I frequently checked the pet camera every day. Then the ugly truths began to surface. My husband was bringing home a young woman during his supposed work hours. It seems like he was bringing her over about 3 times a week. I couldn't believe I had to witness my husband's infidelity when all I wanted was to watch our cat, Luna. Luna also seemed to be scared and wouldn't show up. They ruined my precious relaxation time. No more than that, they betrayed me, which I can't forgive. One day, I'll punish them severely. One day, while I was working, I activated the pet camera. This time, it wasn't the woman my husband was having an affair with, but my in-laws were at our house again. "So, is everything arranged to take that bank book from Helen?" they said with an unpleasant grin. "You're smart. You must have thought of something, right?" "Yeah, I thought about it. I'm thinking of taking the entire vault." "It'll be easy," my husband replied. "Hey, that vault is quite heavy." "Are you sure you can do it? I'll be fine. I'll load it on a cart." "Help me out, Dad." "All right, I'll assist you any time." The safe weighed about 120 pounds. As I suspected, my husband Mark was good-looking but not very smart. Once again, I pledged in my heart to drag these people down to the depths of hell. If we have that money from that bank book, we can go to the casino as a family. We can live as a family of 3 again. That's right. Let's live happily with the money from that bank book, right, Mark? Yeah, but I do feel a little bad about Helen. She was saving up so happily, Mark said. Working hard and saving all that money. Can we really just take it? You can't be so weak-willed. We're doing this for your happiness, remember, right? I'll be happy. Besides, you found a new wife, haven't you? Quickly divorce that woman. I have to divorce for her sake as well. I'll leave the divorce papers here then, my father-in-law declared. That's right. We're waiting for the money from that bank book and the new wife. So I'm going to be divorced. Well, I guess that makes sense, Mark agreed. I found myself strangely accepting. But just how desperate are these people for some money? I was sipping coffee at my office desk, recording the scene on my phone screen. I wasn't even upset or sad anymore. If they had such intentions, so did I. I was going to show them all hell. I was fired up, and then the day finally came. Hey, how much money is in that passbook in the vault? You always seem so happy when you're looking at it, Mark asked. Right now, there's about $500,000 in there. The next day when I got home, there was a signed divorce paper in the living room, and both my husband and the vault were gone. I had a smirk on my face while having breakfast. I acted quickly afterward. I immediately filed the divorce papers and contacted my son right away. Kevin, your father finally stole a vault. Can't believe he managed to carry it. It's so heavy. Mom, I think it's about time you end things with Dad. By the way, did he take everything in the vault too? Actually, I moved all the money to online banking. The passbook is essentially worthless now. The most valuable thing might have been the safe itself since it was so heavy. Oh, by the way, I've already filed the divorce papers. Now, I'm thinking about filing a police report. I think it's definitely a good idea to file a police report, especially considering the seriousness of the situation. It would also be wise to hire a lawyer to ensure your rights are protected and to navigate the legal process effectively. Oh, right, a lawyer. I hadn't thought about that. Thanks for the reminder. I'm cutting ties with Kevin too. He seemed exasperated, and it's probably best to distance yourself from anyone involved in this situation. As Kevin suggested, I reached out to a lawyer through my private investigative contact. I handed over the recording from my pet camera to both the police and the lawyer, and then I waited. After a while, I received a frantic call from my ex-husband. What the hell? The passbook is empty. What happened to the $500,000? You tricked me. That was my money. Where is it? Tell me now, or I'm going back to the house and abandoning your cat, Luna. You just committed theft, and now you're threatening me. From now on, communicate through my lawyer, I said, and I blocked his number. I reported the incident to the police and sent the recording to my lawyer. Oh, what a relief. This is what I wanted to do. Karma is a real pain. I got a call from the police shortly after. We have caught the thief. However, the vault was damaged. It appears he forced it open, and the things inside were burned. My ex-husband and his parents learned that the passbook balance was zero, and apparently they set the things inside the vault on fire. Even though it was his first offense, my ex-husband spent a few days in police custody, and his parents were released with a stern warning. My ex-husband broke into the house he used to live in after he was released. Hey, open up. I come back. I'm sorry. It was just a small prank. Let me in. Let's talk. You haven't filed the divorce papers yet, have we? We're still married, right? Don't make a scene in front of the house. This is no longer your house. I've already filed the divorce papers. We are strangers now. Leave now, or I'll call the police. You jerk. This is my house. Open up. Open up. I called the police when he started causing a scene. 10 minutes later, he was taken away by the police again. I then called my lawyer, explained what happened, and had him start the process of getting a restraining order. Afterwards, I asked my lawyer to sue for emotional distress due to infidelity. The lawyer said we might not get much money from his broke family, but none of that really matters. I'm definitely going to demand alimony. It seems the reason he broke into our house was because he was discarded by his mistress and apparently wanted to get back with me. His mistress promptly transferred $10,000 in alimony and seemed to have fled. It seems they split after the vault incident when the money ran out, so was the love. I'm sure he was enticed by my $500,000. My underpaid ex-husband, who still has $10,000 in debt, and his gambling-addicted parents seem to be struggling with daily life. He appeared to be living in an old single-room apartment without a bath, constantly quarreling among the three of them. This information came from my lawyer. My ex-husband pleaded, "I can afford to pay the alimony. Please reduce the amount." And my ex-husband, who got involved with the police, was on the verge of retirement, but apparently got fired from his company. The elderly parents-in-law have managed to find jobs in cleaning and seem to be barely making ends meet. My ex-husband is now working 3 part-time jobs, but these 3 are gambling addicts, so no matter how much money they have, it disappears. There's no helping them. I had my lawyer tell them no reduction, stay away from her. If you're really sorry, show it with money. If he had stayed with me, he had planned to end the remaining $10,000 debt by the time he retired. But he fell for the sweet talk of his gambling-addicted parents-in-law. In the end, how foolish this $500,000 seemed.